There is a scene in Season 8 of Family Guy where Stewie and Brian visit a world without Christianity. Flying cars, cured diseases, technology 1,000 years ahead. Then, Brian asks about the religious art, and Stewie takes him to the Sistine Chapel, painted entirely by John Hinckley Jr., covered wall to wall in portraits of Jodie Foster. That joke has been quoted in more online arguments about religion than anyone could count. 90 seconds of cartoon animation, and the conversation was over. Family Guy has been doing that for 25 years. Not always that cleanly, sometimes badly enough that McFarlane himself said he regretted it, but consistently, relentlessly, across every major religion on earth: Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Mormonism, and everything in between. Today, we are taking the full 25 years seriously. The banned episode, the one pulled off the internet for 9 years, the one McFarlane apologized for, the Jesus episodes, the God episodes, all of it. Welcome to Red Umbrella. Let us start at the very beginning, the man behind the mockery, Seth MacFarlane's atheism, and why it made Family Guy what it is. There is a moment that Seth MacFarlane has talked about in interviews that tells you everything you need to know about where Family Guy came from. He was 11 years old. He was allowed to draw a comic strip for his local newspaper in Kent, Connecticut. And what did an 11-year-old Seth MacFarlane draw? A man kneeling at the altar, receiving communion, looking up at the priest and asking, "Can I have fries with that?" That is not the joke of a child who is confused about religion. That is the joke of a child who has already decided something about it. MacFarlane grew up Catholic. He went to church. He sat through the masses. He heard the stories. And somewhere between the pews and the communion wafers, he came to a conclusion that he has spent the rest of his life broadcasting to millions of people through a cartoon family in fictional Rhode Island. He does not believe any of it. Not a word, not a prayer, not a single one. He has never been quiet about this. In interviews, on television, in print, Seth MacFarlane has said the same thing in 100 different ways. His most direct version goes like this: he does not believe in God, he is an atheist, and he considers himself a critical thinker. He says it fascinates him that in the 21st century, most people still believe in what he calls the invisible man living in the sky. That is a George Carlin line he has borrowed, and he has borrowed it proudly, because Carlin is one of his heroes, and the sentiment matches his own perfectly. When he appeared on Bill Maher's show in May of 2009, Maher asked him about atheism becoming more visible in public life. MacFarlane's response was 4 words: "I think it's about time. Not careful. Not diplomatic." 4 words. Flat out, no softening. That is the man who made Family Guy. That is the sensibility behind every priest joke, every cutaway gag involving the Pope, every scene where God shows up behaving badly. None of it is accidental. All of it flows from the same source. What makes this matter for understanding the show is that MacFarlane did not just put his beliefs into one episode and move on. He built an entire television universe around them. He created Brian Griffin, the family dog who reads, drinks martinis, writes bad novels, and considers himself the smartest person in any room, and has been open about the fact that Brian is his stand-in. When Brian argues against religion, that is Seth MacFarlane arguing against religion. When Brian gets treated like a pariah for being an atheist, that is MacFarlane working something out about how atheists are treated in a country where most people still go to church. Brian is not the only vessel for these ideas. Peter Griffin's relationship with his devout Catholic father Francis runs through the entire show's early seasons as a portrait of what MacFarlane seems to genuinely believe religious extremism looks like up close. Not bombs or violence, but shame, cruelty, judgment, and a total inability to love the people right in front of you without conditions attached. The show uses Francis to say something MacFarlane has said in his own interviews, that religion notoriously claims to have invented morality, but morality exists in animals, in nature, in human beings who have never opened a Bible. The writer who shaped most of the show's religion-focused episodes is a man named Danny Smith. He wrote Holy Crap, which introduced Francis Griffin. He wrote Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, which made Brian's atheism the center of an entire episode. He wrote The Father, the Son, and the Holy Fawns, which had Peter convert to Mormonism, then Jehovah's Witnesses, then Hinduism, then eventually start his own religion based on a Happy Days character. In the DVD commentary for one of these episodes, Smith mentioned offhand that he was still working through some issues with his own Catholic upbringing. That one sentence explains more about Family Guy's relationship with religion than any interview MacFarlane ever gave. This is a show built by people who grew up in the church and left it. Not people who never had religion to begin with. Not outsiders throwing rocks. People who were inside it, who absorbed it, who were shaped by it, and who are still, decades later, processing what it did to them. The comedy is the processing. Every joke is a question that never got a satisfying answer when they were young. MacFarlane has been clear in separate interviews over the years about why he thinks being vocal about atheism matters. He compares it to the civil rights movement. He says there need to be people willing to stand up and make the public case for knowledge over faith, for evidence over belief, for science over scripture. He executive produced the 2014 science series Cosmos, hosted by Neil deGrasse Tyson, a show that aired on Fox, the same network that airs Family Guy, and made the straightforward argument that the universe is vast and old and indifferent and does not require a creator to be explained. He donated Carl Sagan's personal papers to the Library of Congress. He has spent his own money and his own platform making a case that he also makes through cartoon cutaway gags involving Peter Griffin getting hit by a car. The breadth of that commitment is worth sitting with. This is not a man who stumbled into controversy. This is not a writer's room that pushed too hard in one direction by accident. Family Guy's religious satire is the product of a specific worldview held by a specific person who has been explicit about that worldview for his entire career. When the show is funny about religion, it is funny in the way a very smart person who grew up Catholic and rejected it is funny about religion. Which is to say, it is not always fair, it is not always even, but it is always personal. The Parents Television Council, which has waged a years-long campaign against Family Guy, described the show's religious content as anti-Christian bigotry. MacFarlane's response to the PTC, when asked about them in an interview, was that they are literally terrible human beings, that they spend their entire day hating people for an organization that prides itself on Christian values, and that they can all take a long walk off a short pier. He added, with a certain dry humor, "I'm an atheist, so what do I know?" What he knows is this: 25 years of television, 22 seasons, a show that has been canceled twice and came back both times. A show that has outlasted almost every animated comedy that ever competed with it. A show that has introduced the same argument, that religion is a human invention, that believers are either fooled or cruel, that reason is the only honest tool, to tens of millions of people over multiple decades. That 11-year-old boy with the communion fries joke grew up. He got a television show. And he spent the next quarter century doing what he started doing in the local paper, using comedy to say the things about religion that he has always believed, but that most people, in most rooms, are still too polite to say out loud. Every episode this video covers, every scene, every joke, every banned episode and bombing controversy and lawsuit and angry IMDb review, it all leads back to this. One man. One very specific conclusion he reached sometime before he was old enough to drive. And a cartoon family that has been carrying that conclusion into living rooms around the world every single week since 1999. Before we get into the specific episodes, though, we need to talk about where the show actually drew the template from. Because MacFarlane did not invent the approach from scratch. The foundation was laid in a single episode in the show's second season, before any of the famous religion controversies had even happened yet. The episode introduced a character who would become the most unambiguous statement the show ever made about what it thinks organized religion does to the people closest to it. And it did it through a father and a son, in a way that the show's writers have been riffing on ever since. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That character's name was Francis Griffin, and if you want to understand where every single religion joke in this show came from, you have to start with him. Section 2. The Original Sin, Francis Griffin, Catholicism, and the template for every religion joke that followed. Peter Griffin has a father. His name is Francis, and from the moment Francis Griffin walked through the front door of the Griffin house in the second season of Family Guy, the show had found its most honest and most brutal way of saying what it actually thinks about what religion can do to a family. The episode is called Holy Crap. It aired on September 30th, 1999. It is the second episode of the second season, which means the show was barely finding its feet when it decided to make this particular argument. It was not saving it for later. it was not easing the audience in. The second real episode of the second season of Family Guy introduced a devoutly Catholic father who calls his son's wife a Protestant whore, tells his grandson that going to the bathroom is a sin, tells his granddaughter she is a harlot for holding hands with a boy, and tells a baby bedtime stories about the specific punishments that God has waiting for sinners in hell. That is the opening statement. That is the template. And every single religion joke Family Guy has told in the 25 years since has been some version of what Francis Griffin represents in that episode. The voice of Francis Griffin was Charles Durning, an actor who worked in film and television for decades before his death in 2012 at the age of 89. Durning brought something specific to the role that pure comedy writing could not have manufactured on its own. He made Francis genuinely frightening. Not cartoonishly frightening, not loud and dumb the way Peter is loud and dumb, but cold and certain in a way that felt real. Francis does not yell because he is angry. Francis is calm because he is absolutely sure he is right. That certainty, that total absence of doubt, is exactly what the show is targeting. Not faith itself, exactly. Faith in that particular flavor. The kind that looks at a child going to the bathroom and sees sin. The kind that looks at a teenage girl holding hands and sees a harlot. That kind. The episode begins with Francis being forced into retirement from his job at the Pawtucket Mill. He moves in with Peter and the family, and almost immediately, the damage starts. He tells Chris, while the boy is simply taking his time in the bathroom, that he knows what Chris is doing in there, and that it is a sin. He tells Chris that God is watching. Chris, who is doing nothing wrong, walks out of the bathroom genuinely convinced that defecation is a sin and that God is a pervert for watching it happen. That is a joke, yes. But underneath the joke is something the show means. Children absorb what adults in authority tell them. When the authority is religion, and the adult using that authority is cruel or careless, the child does not get to decide what is true. The child just believes it and carries it. Meg gets the same treatment. She comes home happy, having walked home from school with a neighbor boy named Kevin. Francis looks at her and says Kevin will find it easy to take her hand when God strikes her heart with leprosy. He can take it right home with him. Meg is a teenager who held hands with a boy. Francis treats it like the beginning of her eternal damnation. The show does not comment on this directly. It does not have another character step in and correct Francis. It just lets the scene breathe and lets the audience feel what it feels like to be Meg in that moment, which is small and ashamed for no reason. Stewie gets the bedtime stories. Francis sits on the edge of the baby's bed and tells him about the punishments that await sinners in hell. Stewie's reaction, though, is not fear. Stewie listens to the Bible stories with growing fascination and concludes that God must be genuinely evil and therefore worth worshiping. He picks up the Bible the next day and says, with absolute delight, that it is a thumping good read. Lions eating Christians, people nailing each other to 2x4s. He says you will not find that in Winnie the Pooh. The show is making 2 points at the same time here. One is that the Bible is violent in ways that most people who claim to follow it prefer not to dwell on. The other is that the specific way Francis presents religion, as a system of punishment and threat, is actually more likely to produce a child who is fascinated by cruelty than a child who loves God. Then there is Lois. Francis has called her a Protestant whore since the day Peter married her. He told Peter it was a pity he could not find himself a nice Irish Catholic girl. At the wedding, he taped a sign reading, "To a Protestant whore," underneath the "Just Married" sign on the back of the limo. He does not dislike Lois as a person. He has barely registered her as a person. She is a category violation, a Protestant in his Catholic family, and that is all she is to him. The show lets this sit for the whole episode without resolution, because that is how it actually works. Francis does not have a moment where he reconsiders. He does not soften at the end and decide that Lois is a good woman. He tells Peter at the end of the episode, directly and without apology, that while he loves his son, he does not like him. That is the closing emotional note of the episode. Not warmth, not growth, just the truth of what a man like Francis is capable of offering. The episode's central plot involves Peter trying to find a way to win his father's approval. He brings Francis to a baseball game. He gets Francis a job at the toy factory where Peter works. Francis is so good at the job that he is immediately made foreman and fires Peter on the spot. Peter takes this quietly, then tries to think of something Francis could not reject. He sees on the television news that the Pope is visiting Boston on tour. Peter's idea is to find the Pope and bring him to Francis, so the Pope can tell Francis that Peter is a good man. This is, in the logic of the show, the only authority figure in the world that Francis would accept over his own judgment. The Pope. The actual Pope. So Peter kidnaps him. Not violently. He tracks him down at his hotel, talks his way into the room, and convinces the Pope to come with him. The Pope, for his part, is depicted as a gentle and reasonable man. When he eventually meets Francis, and Francis starts berating him for being too soft on Peter's interfaith marriage, the Pope listens and then quietly tells Francis that Peter has raised a loving family, and that in his view, that is not nothing. Francis's response is to tell the Pope that he is not a true Catholic. Francis Griffin is prepared to argue with the Pope about Catholicism. He is more Catholic than the Pope. He is more certain than the man who runs the institution. The episode was written by Danny Smith. In the DVD commentary, Smith mentioned that he was still working through some issues with his own Catholic upbringing. That one line has been noted and quoted by multiple people who have analyzed the show because it is the most honest thing that could be said about what Holy Crap is really doing. This is not a writer making jokes at a safe distance from a topic he does not know. This is someone who lived inside this world, who knew men like Francis, who understood the specific way that kind of religious certainty operates inside a family, and who found the only outlet available to him to process it, which was a cartoon. TV Tropes, in its analysis of the episode, noted that Holy Crap is the first of the show's religious person causes problems plots, and that it is, importantly, more even-handed than the episodes that followed. That observation is worth sitting with, because what it means is that the show started here, with a portrait of a man who causes real, specific harm to real, specific people in his family because of how he practices his faith. And over time, the episodes that followed became less interested in the specific harm and more interested in the broader argument. Francis is a character. He has a history with Peter, a wound underneath the cruelty, a complicated love that he is incapable of expressing properly. The later religion episodes, as we will see, sometimes skip the character and go straight to the argument. Holy Crap has both. What the episode established, beyond the comedy, is a framework. Religion in Family Guy will almost always be something that one person uses against another person. It will be a tool for shame, for judgment, for exclusion. It will be wielded by someone who is absolutely certain they are right, against someone who has no way to argue back because the rules of the game have been set up so that questioning the religion is itself a sin. The person being harmed is usually a child, or a woman, or someone already at the bottom of the family's social order. The person wielding the religion is usually a man with authority who has found in Scripture the perfect justification for the cruelty he was probably going to express anyway. That is Francis Griffin. That is Holy Crap. That is the foundation of everything the show does with religion for the next 25 years. Charles Durning kept voicing Francis in the episodes that followed, including The Father, the Son, and the Holy Fawns in Season 4, where Francis baptizes baby Stewie with tainted holy water without telling Lois, triggering another episode-length argument about religion and faith and what parents have the right to do to their children's spiritual lives. Every time Francis appeared, the show returned to that same template. Certain, unkind, absolutely convinced that his cruelty was God-given. When Durning died in 2012, the show retired the character rather than recast him. That decision says something about how much of Holy Crap lived specifically in Durning's performance, in the quiet certainty he gave Francis, the genuine warmth underneath the judgment that made the whole portrait feel true rather than cartoonish. The template Francis established is worth naming clearly before we move on, because you will see it reappear in different forms throughout every section of this video. Religion in Family Guy is a closed system. It cannot be questioned from inside, because questioning it is already a sin. It cannot be questioned from outside, because outsiders are already lost. The person who holds the religion uses it to make the people around them feel small. And the show's job, as it saw it from the very beginning, was to hold up a mirror to that closed system and say, look at what this is actually doing to this family.
Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Now, the show did not stay that personal for long. The next time it took on religion in a major way, it did not pick a character or a family or a specific wound. It picked a whole ethnicity, a whole faith, a whole stereotype so loaded that Fox refused to let the episode air for 4 years. And the story of what happened to that episode, before it aired, during the legal fight that followed, and in the years since, is one of the strangest chapters in the show's history. Section 3. The Banned Episode. Judaism __quote _2 __ and the 4-year Fox standoff. There is a Family Guy episode that was finished, fully animated, fully voiced, fully scored, and completely ready to air. And then Fox looked at it and said no. Not yet. Maybe not ever. They put it in a drawer and left it there for 3 years while the show continued airing around it. And then the show got canceled anyway, and the episode just sat there, done and unseen, waiting. The episode is called When You Wish Upon a Weinstein. It was produced in the year 2000, during the second season of Family Guy's original run. It was not a rough cut. It was not an experiment. It was a complete, finished episode of television that Fox decided it could not put on the air because of what it was about and how it handled the subject. What it was about was Judaism. Specifically, it was about Peter Griffin deciding that Jewish people have a magical relationship with money, and that if he could just get a Jewish person into his life, all of his financial problems would go away. That is the premise. That is what Fox looked at and said, we cannot broadcast this. To understand why the episode exists at all, and why it is complicated rather than simply offensive, you need to know who wrote it. The writer's name is Ricky Blitt, and Ricky Blitt is Jewish. This was not a room full of non-Jewish writers making jokes at a community's expense. This was a Jewish writer working through something about his own identity, his own community, his own experience of being Jewish in America, using the specific tool of Peter Griffin's spectacular ignorance as the delivery mechanism. The joke was always supposed to be on Peter, not on Judaism. The episode begins with Peter losing money. He gives his family's emergency savings to a man selling volcano insurance. This is a very Peter thing to do, and it tracks perfectly with who the character is. Not malicious, just catastrophically bad at evaluating whether things make sense. Lois is furious. Peter needs to get the money back. While feeling sorry for himself, Peter has a conversation with his friends Quagmire and Cleveland, in which both of them describe financial success they achieved after hiring people with Jewish-sounding names. Peter takes this at face value completely, the way Peter takes everything at face value, and immediately concludes that what he needs is a Jewish person in his life to fix his finances. He does not think of this as a stereotype. He thinks of it as a practical solution to a practical problem. Shortly after, a Jewish man named Max Weinstein has car trouble outside the Griffin house. Peter sees this as a sign from God and chases Max down the street to ask for his help. Max, who is just a regular person who happened to have car trouble, ends up helping the Griffins recover their lost money from the insurance scammer. Peter accompanies Max to synagogue, invites him to dinner, and witnesses what he interprets as more evidence of the magical financial competence of Jewish people. At this point, Peter reaches his conclusion. He decides that if he converts his son Chris to Judaism, Chris will become smart and successful in life. He tells Lois this plan. Lois says no. Peter secretly drives Chris to Las Vegas for a quickie bar mitzvah, sneaking out in the middle of the night like a man who has come up with the greatest idea anyone has ever had. Lois finds out from Brian, by torturing him with a dog whistle until he talks, and drives to Las Vegas to stop the ceremony. She arrives in time,
But when she tries to halt the bar mitzvah, the congregation assumes she is insulting their religion and chases the Griffin family out of the synagogue. The family escapes by locking the doors with a large Star of David and getting onto a bus. The bus turns out to be full of nuns who are furious that Peter, a Catholic, entered a synagogue and put on a yarmulke. They attack him with rulers. That is the ending. Both groups, Jewish people offended by Lois's interruption and Catholics offended by Peter's straying, are chasing the same family at the same time. The show's point is that Peter caused all of this through his own ignorance, and that the lesson Lois delivers is a simple one. Success is not based on religion. Before the episode aired anywhere, Seth MacFarlane showed the script to 2 rabbis. Both of them approved the episode. Their reasoning was that Peter learns the right lesson at the end, and that the comedy comes from Peter's ignorance rather than from Judaism itself being a target. MacFarlane has mentioned this in the DVD commentary for the episode. He also noted there that the writer, Ricky Blitt, is Jewish, and that Ben Stein, who voices the rabbi in the episode, is also Jewish. There is something worth noting in that detail. The show went out of its way to involve Jewish voices at every level of the episode's creation, from the writer to the cast. And still, Fox looked at the finished product and said it was too risky. MacFarlane's response to this, delivered before the episode's first airing on Adult Swim, was dry and sharp. He said this was the episode Fox refused to air because they felt it was too risky, and that in this case, too risky means anything that does not feature Paris Hilton half naked on the hood of a car. The episode finally got its first public airing on September 9th, 2003, on the DVD release of Volume 2. It then aired on Adult Swim on November 9th, 2003. Fox did not broadcast it until December 10th, 2004, and when Fox aired it, they used a censored version with one lyric changed. The lyric in question is from a song Peter sings called "I Need a Jew," sung to the tune of the Disney song "When You Wish Upon a Star." The original DVD version of the song includes the line, "Even though they killed my Lord, I need a Jew." Fox replaced that line on broadcast with, "I don't think they killed my Lord, I need a Jew." The original line is still in the closed captions of the broadcast version. If you watch Peter's mouth during the broadcast version, he is still saying the original line. MacFarlane recorded the replacement line himself as an alternate version, but the visual animation was never changed to match it. The song itself became the subject of a lawsuit. In October 2007, the Bourne Company, which owns the copyright to the original Disney song "When You Wish Upon a Star," sued Fox, Cartoon Network, Seth MacFarlane, and several other parties. They claimed that "I Need a Jew" caused damage to the value of their original song because of the offensive nature of its lyrics, and they asked the court to stop the episode from being distributed. The lawsuit sought money damages and a halt to the program's distribution across all platforms. A federal judge named Deborah Batts dismissed the lawsuit in March 2009, ruling that the creators of Family Guy had not infringed on the Bourne Company's copyright. The case was over. The episode stayed in circulation. There is one more piece of the episode worth noting, and it is the kind of thing that sounds like it was invented, but actually happened. The voice actor who plays Chris Griffin, the son that Peter tries to secretly convert to Judaism, is Seth Green. Seth Green is Jewish. The episode's central plot involves forcing Chris through a bar mitzvah, a Jewish coming-of-age ceremony, as a scheme to make him smarter. The boy being converted is voiced by a man who is himself Jewish. It is the most ironic casting in the episode's history, and it was not planned to be a statement. It just happened to be the case because Seth Green had been the voice of Chris since the beginning. The episode, once it finally aired, received mixed reactions. A writer for The Forward, which is a Jewish publication, said the episode was not necessarily offensive to Jewish people, but was too empty to be funny. The Australian Jewish studies writer Dvir Abramovich later accused multiple Family Guy episodes of reinforcing Jewish stereotypes. And in 2014, a writer in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz pointed to a different episode, 3 Acts of God, as evidence of what they called long-held anti-Semitism by MacFarlane. The Weinstein episode sat at the center of years of debate about where the line is between a Jewish writer making jokes about his own community and a television network broadcasting stereotypes to millions of people. What the episode ultimately reveals, more than any of the debates about its content, is how nervous American network television was about religion in the early 2000s. Fox sat on a completed episode for 4 years. They did not cancel it. They did not reshoot it. They just held it, unable to decide whether the joke was acceptable or not, until the show itself got canceled and the question temporarily stopped mattering. During those 4 years, Family Guy continued making religion jokes. The Francis Griffin character appeared again. The show kept pushing. But the one episode that pushed specifically at Judaism, written by a Jewish writer, vetted by Jewish rabbis, starring a Jewish voice actor, was the one Fox could not bring itself to put on the air. Not because it was the most offensive thing the show had ever done, but because of a calculation about audience, about community, about what kind of backlash was worth risking. The irony is that the episode's entire moral is that judging people by their religion is wrong. The lesson Lois delivers at the end, that success is not based on religion, is the clearest, most straightforward moral the show has ever attached to a religion-based plot. And Fox still would not air it for 4 years. When the episode finally did air, it found its audience. It is now considered one of the stronger episodes of the show's early run. The lawsuit is over, the controversy has faded. The I Need a Jew song is one of the more referenced pieces of music from the entire series. But the story of the 4-year standoff is not really about the episode. It is about what the episode revealed. That Family Guy's relationship with religion was already complicated enough, controversial enough, and commercially risky enough that a major television network had to make a business decision about whether a cartoon dog chasing a man named Max Weinstein down a street was something America was ready to watch. America eventually watched it. And before long, the show would go after something much more central to its creator's worldview than a single stereotype about one community. It would go after the whole institution of belief itself, in a single episode that made the show's atheist dog the center of a community-wide hunt, and turned an entire town into a mob chasing a cartoon for not believing in God. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. That episode is coming, but to understand how heavy-handed it got, heavy-handed enough that McFarlane himself later said it was a mistake, we need to watch the show go through several more layers first, including an episode where Peter Griffin tries to convert to every religion in existence and ends up starting his own church based on a television character from the 1970s. Section 4. Peter Tries Everything. Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Hinduism, and the Church of the Fawns. There is a specific kind of comedy that Family Guy does better than almost any other show, and it is the comedy of a very stupid man taking a very serious thing completely seriously for entirely the wrong reasons. Peter Griffin converting to Mormonism because he heard about polygamy. Peter Griffin becoming a Jehovah's Witness and then standing at someone's door with absolutely nothing to say. Peter Griffin tackling a Hindu spiritual leader to the floor because he thought the red dot on the man's forehead was a sniper's laser sight. These are not random jokes. They are all from the same episode. The episode is called The Father, the Son, and the Holy Fawns. It aired on December 18th, 2005 as the 18th episode of Season 4. It was written by Danny Smith, the same man who wrote Holy Crap and would later write Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, and it represents the most wide-ranging single-episode attack on organized religion the show had produced up to that point. Not wide-ranging because it is mean, but wide-ranging because it is systematic. One by one, the episode runs every major Western religion through the same test, and one by one, every single one of them fails Peter Griffin. Which, given who Peter Griffin is, might say more about Peter than about the religions. Or it might not. The show is happy to let you decide. The episode begins with Francis Griffin, Peter's devoutly Catholic father, doing something he has absolutely no right to do. Without telling Lois, without asking permission, without even mentioning it to Peter, Francis baptizes baby Stewie, using holy water that he has brought with him specifically for this purpose.
He calls it tainted holy water in the episode, which raises questions the show does not bother to answer. The baptism happens quietly, almost secretly, and when Lois finds out, she is furious. This is the scene that sets everything in motion, and it is worth pausing on for a moment. Francis does not baptize Stewie out of malice. He does it because, in his worldview, an unbaptized child is in genuine spiritual danger, and he loves his grandson enough, in his way, to take action without asking anyone. The problem is that taking spiritual action on someone else's child without their knowledge or consent is not love. It is control dressed up as love. It is the same move Francis makes throughout his appearances on the show. The certainty that he is right, overriding the basic courtesy of treating the people around him as having any say in their own lives. Lois tells Peter that it is time for him to find his own religious beliefs. She is done with Francis making decisions for their family. Peter takes this instruction with his usual energy, which means he approaches religion the way he approaches everything, as a consumer looking for the best deal. His first stop is Mormonism. Peter converts to Mormonism for one reason and one reason only. He has heard that Mormons are allowed to have more than one wife, and to Peter Griffin, this sounds like an excellent arrangement. He does not investigate the theology, he does not read anything, he does not ask what Mormons believe or how they practice their faith, or what the community looks like. He hears polygamy and signs up. He then discovers that Mormons cannot drink alcohol. He leaves immediately. This is a 12-second sequence that lands as pure comedy, but it is also making a clean and specific point. Peter is not choosing Mormonism because he is spiritually moved by it. He is choosing it because it offers him something he wants. When it turns out the package deal includes a restriction he does not want, the spiritual commitment evaporates instantly. The show is saying that this is how a lot of people relate to religion, not as a genuine encounter with something bigger than themselves, but as a transaction. What do I get? What do I have to give up? Does the math work? If not, next. His second attempt is the Jehovah's Witnesses. Peter becomes a Jehovah's Witness and begins doing what Jehovah's Witnesses are known for, which is going door to door to share their beliefs with neighbors. Peter knocks on a door. Someone opens it, and Peter stands there with absolutely nothing to say because he has no idea what the Jehovah's Witnesses actually teach. He wanted to be a part of something. He did not want to understand what that something was. When someone is genuinely interested in hearing what he has to say, Peter realizes the entire exercise is over because he cannot say anything. This is a different kind of joke than the Mormonism gag. The Mormonism joke is about desire. Peter wants what religion can give him. The Jehovah's Witnesses joke is about identity. Peter wants to belong to something without doing the work of knowing what that thing is. Both are recognizable. Both are things that real people do with real religions. The show is not being abstract here. It is describing something that is actually common. His third attempt is Hinduism. Peter goes to see a Hindu spiritual leader, a guru, and is doing reasonably well until he notices the red dot on the guru's forehead. Peter's mind immediately goes to the action movies he has seen, where a red dot on someone's head means a sniper has them in his sights. Peter tackles the guru to the floor to save his life. He is immediately removed from the premises and is not allowed to come back. The joke is physical comedy, but the target is the same one. Peter cannot engage with a religion he does not already recognize because he has no framework for understanding anything outside the very narrow cultural world he lives in. A bindi on a Hindu leader's forehead reads to him as a threat because that is the only context he has for a red dot on a forehead. The show does not need to say that this is ignorance. The scene demonstrates it. You see Peter tackle an innocent man, and you understand everything you need to understand about what the episode is saying. Having failed at every existing religion, Peter does what Peter Griffin always does when the available options disappoint him. He invents a new one. Peter creates the first United Church of the Fawns. The Fawns, for anyone who needs the reference, is Arthur Fonzarelli, a character from the television show Happy Days, which aired from 1974 to 1984. He was played by Henry Winkler and became one of the most recognizable television characters of that era, known for being cool, confident, and capable of making a jukebox work by hitting it.
Peter Griffin has always loved the Fonz. And now, Peter Griffin has decided that the Fonz represents everything a spiritual leader should be: confident, unshakable, respected, and has built a church around him. The surprising thing is that people show up. The First United Church of the Fonz draws a genuine congregation. People come to the services, they respond to what Peter is preaching, which is essentially the values of the Fonz applied to daily life. Be cool, be good to people, fix things when they break. None of this is theologically sophisticated. But the people sitting in those pews are getting something out of it, and the show lets that happen without immediately undercutting it. Then the poaching starts. A man played by Sherman Hemsley, who was famous for playing George Jefferson on the television shows All in the Family and The Jeffersons, shows up and announces that he has formed the Church of George Jefferson. A large portion of the congregation gets up and leaves with him. Then Gavin MacLeod, known for playing Captain Steubing on The Love Boat, arrives and announces the Church of Captain Steubing. Another section of the congregation leaves. Finally, Kirk Cameron shows up. Peter assumes Cameron is there to announce the Church of Mike Seaver, which is the character Cameron played on the show Growing Pains. But Cameron says he is there to convert people to actual Christianity, and the rest of the congregation leaves with him. Peter is alone. His church has been emptied out, systematically, by a sequence of other people with other offers. He goes home and tells Lois that the church is finished. Lois tells him that if even one person took something real from what he was preaching, then it was worth doing. Peter doubts this strongly. The last scene shifts to Francis Griffin, sitting alone, looking at a picture of the Fonz on his wall. That final image is the sharpest thing in the episode. Francis, the most rigid, most certain, most institutionally religious character in the show's universe, is sitting quietly looking at a picture of Arthur Fonzarelli. The show does not explain this. It does not give Francis a speech about what it means. It just shows you the image and lets it land. The man who baptized Stewie with tainted holy water, the man who called Lois a Protestant whore, the man who told Chris that God was watching him in the bathroom, that man has a picture of the Fonz on his wall. He found something in Peter's church. Not enough to change who he is, but something. The episode aired on December 18th, 2005, and drew 8.26 million viewers in its original broadcast. It was written again by Danny Smith, who at this point had quietly become the show's primary architect of religion-based plots. 3 major religion episodes: Holy Crap, When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, and now The Father, the Son, and the Holy Fonz, all came from the same writer, the same man working through the same questions about faith and family and what organized religion does to the people caught inside it. What the episode adds to the conversation that Holy Crap and the Weinstein episode did not is the question of what religion actually gives people. Holy Crap argued that religion in the wrong hands becomes a weapon. The Weinstein episode argued that treating religion as a source of magical benefits is ignorant. The Fonz episode asks something slightly different. What if the thing people are looking for in religion is just belonging, just values, just someone telling them with confidence that some things matter and other things do not? And what if a cartoon character from the 1970s can provide that just as effectively as an ancient institution? The episode does not answer that question directly. Peter's church fails, and he converts back to Christianity at the end. But the fact that people showed up, the fact that they responded, the fact that Francis Griffin, the most devout man in the show's universe, had a picture of the Fonz on his wall, suggests that the show thinks the answer might be more complicated than either side of the religion debate wants to admit. That complication, though, does not last long in the show's history. The next time Family Guy tackles atheism directly, it does not ask questions. It picks a side, loudly, in a way that upset religious viewers, upset atheist viewers, and upset Seth MacFarlane himself enough that he later said the whole thing was a mistake. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And it did it by having an entire town decide that Brian Griffin, a dog who does not believe in God, was worse than Hitler. Section 5. The Atheist Dog Speaks. Not all dogs go to heaven, and the episode MacFarlane admitted was a mistake. The episode aired on March 29th, 2009. It is the 11th episode of Season 7. It is called Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, which is a play on the title of the 1989 animated film All Dogs Go to Heaven. And it is, by a significant margin, the most divisive episode in the entire history of Family Guy's relationship with religion. Not because it went the furthest, not because it was the most graphic or the most shocking, but because it was the most direct. Every other religion episode the show had done up to this point used Peter Griffin as a buffer. Peter's ignorance, Peter's stupidity, Peter's inability to think anything through. The comedy came from watching a very dumb man interact with serious things badly. That buffer meant the show always had an escape hatch. The joke is on Peter. We are not saying religion is bad. We are saying Peter is dumb. Not All Dogs Go to Heaven removes the buffer entirely. Brian Griffin is not dumb. Brian is the show's intellectual character. Brian reads books. Brian writes novels. Badly, but he writes them. Brian has opinions and can articulate them. When Brian says something, the show is not using ignorance as cover. The show is speaking. And in this episode, Brian says he does not believe in God. The episode has two plots running side by side. The main plot, which is the one that caused all the trouble, follows Meg after she catches the mumps at a Star Trek convention and spends her recovery watching the Religion Channel in bed. She sees Kirk Cameron, the actor who played Mike Seaver on Growing Pains and who became a prominent Christian speaker in real life, preaching on television, and she becomes a born-again Christian. The second plot follows Stewie, who is furious that he did not get to ask any questions at the Star Trek convention's panel with the cast of The Next Generation, and who builds a teleporter to kidnap the entire cast and bring them to his room. The Star Trek plot exists to give the episode some breathing room, and to justify the extremely impressive list of guest stars. Patrick Stewart, Jonathan Frakes, Brent Spiner, LeVar Burton, Gates McFadden, Michael Dorn, Will Wheaton, Denise Crosby, and Marina Sirtis all voiced themselves. The episode's promotional materials leaned heavily on the Star Trek reunion, which is why, as TV Tropes noted, many people who tuned in expecting a Star Trek episode got something very different. What they got was this. Meg, newly religious and filled with the kind of certainty that new converts often have, discovers that Brian is an atheist. She is horrified. She tells the family. The family's reaction is immediate and total. Lois says that an atheist is just about the worst thing a person can be. Peter tells Brian to shut up and says he has dominion over Brian and commands him to believe in God. Chris tells Brian he is not going to get anything for Christmas. This is already the show doing something specific. The family's reaction to Brian's atheism is not curiosity or concern. It is disgust and rejection, immediate and total, from the people who are supposed to love him. The show is depicting religious intolerance, not the abstract kind, but the kind that happens at the kitchen table, from the people you live with. Meg then takes it further. She spreads the word of Brian's atheism around Quahog. The town finds out, and Quahog's reaction is swift and extreme. Brian is banned from every bar in town. He is banned from every convenience store. He cannot buy alcohol anywhere. He cannot go out in public without being abused. The local news covers the story. His face appears on Channel 5 with the caption, "Worse than Hitler," underneath it. Mayor Adam West appears on the news and delivers the line that became the episode's most remembered moment. He says that Brian being an atheist is shocking, to say the least, and that he would rather have a terrorist living in their midst because at least terrorists believe in a god. He adds, even if it is a smelly brown god. That line is doing several things at the same time. It is mocking the idea that atheism is more dangerous than actual terrorism. It is also mocking the specific kind of American religious nationalism that assigns value to people based on whether they believe in the right version of God. And it is including an ugly ethnic joke, smelly brown God, that is the show's way of pointing at the racism that often sits underneath that kind of American religious nationalism, without making the racism the main point. The joke is on Mayor West. The target is the worldview he is expressing. Brian, unable to buy alcohol anywhere and desperate for a drink, eventually does what desperate people do. He pretends to convert. He fakes his way through a prayer meeting, tells Meg he now believes, and watches the social pressure lift immediately.
The town accepts him again the moment he says the right words. This is another specific thing the show is doing. Belief, in this version of Quahog, is not something anyone can verify or test. It is a performance. You say the words, and you are in. You refuse to say the words, and you are out. Whether anything is actually happening inside you is irrelevant.
The episode's emotional climax comes when Brian can no longer sustain the pretense. He admits to Meg that he was lying. And then, in the scene that generated the most controversy, he makes his case to her. He tells her that if there were truly a loving God, that God would not have given Meg an attractive mother like Lois, while making Meg look like Peter. He tells her that a loving God would not have put her in a house where nobody respects or cares about her. He tells her to ask herself what kind of God would do that to someone. Meg, devastated, concedes. She says she does not know how she can feel loved. Brian tells her that the answers are inside herself, and that the real meaning of their existence is out there somewhere. The scene ends with Brian essentially having destroyed Meg's faith by pointing at her physical appearance and her miserable home life as evidence against the existence of God. And the episode ends there, emotionally, with Meg's faith dismantled and Brian delivering a line about meaning being somewhere out there, which is about as vague and unsatisfying as a conclusion can be. The backlash was immediate and came from multiple directions at once. Religious viewers were furious. The IMDb reviews for the episode filled up with people pointing out that the show had moved from satire into direct attack. One reviewer said it was not the first time Family Guy had made religion-based jokes, but that this time it was not a joke. It was Seth MacFarlane using his show to tell his audience directly that anyone who believes in God is an idiot. Another said Brian's argument amounted to God's purpose being a cosmic happiness machine, and that if your life is not going well, that proves God does not exist, which they called a deeply shallow reading of what any major religion actually teaches. Atheist viewers were also unhappy, which was the surprise. The episode is supposed to be sympathetic to Brian's position, but Brian's actual arguments against God's existence are, as multiple reviewers noted, embarrassingly weak. Brian says the Hubble Space Telescope has found no evidence of a bearded man sitting on a cloud. He points at Meg's appearance as proof of divine indifference. These are not serious philosophical arguments against the existence of God. They are the arguments of someone who has not thought very hard about the question. Multiple atheist viewers said the episode made atheists look worse than it made believers look, because at least the believers in the episode have something they genuinely hold on to, while Brian's atheism amounts to, God did not make Meg pretty enough, therefore God does not exist. TV Tropes called Brian's arguments extremely superficial and noted that his reasoning makes him come across as self-aggrandizing throughout the episode. The site also noted that the episode's intended message, that religious intolerance toward atheists is wrong, gets completely buried under the weight of Brian being a bad representative of the position he is supposedly defending. Seth MacFarlane addressed all of this in the DVD commentary for the episode. He and the other writers acknowledged that the heavy-handedness was a mistake. They said they had been genuinely trying to be even-handed about the religion versus atheism question, that several of the writers involved in the episode were themselves religious or had religious backgrounds, and that the episode came out more one-sided than they intended. MacFarlane later confirmed, in comments after the DVD release, that he regretted the episode being made in the form it ended up in. That admission is unusual. MacFarlane is not someone who apologizes for content often. He has defended the show against hundreds of complaints across dozens of years without much visible discomfort. The fact that he specifically walked back "Not all dogs go to heaven" suggests that the episode crossed a line that he himself could feel, even if he could not articulate exactly where the line was. What the episode gets right, underneath all of its problems, is the portrait of what social rejection feels like. Brian's experience of being made a pariah, banned from bars, unable to buy cigarettes, described as worse than Hitler on the evening news, is played for comedy but lands as something more uncomfortable. The comedy comes from the extremity of the reaction. The discomfort comes from the recognition that the reaction is not entirely fictional. People have lost friendships, families, and community standing for saying they do not believe in God. The scale is exaggerated, but the shape is real. The episode was written by Danny Smith. This is now the fourth major religion episode written by the same man. Holy Crap, the Fonz episode, and the Weinstein episode before this one. Smith has become, through sheer accumulation, the show's primary voice on questions of faith. And with Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, his approach shifted. The earlier episodes used Peter as the focal point, and kept the argument at a slight distance. This episode put the argument in Brian's mouth and pointed it directly at the audience. It did not entirely work. McFarlane said so himself. But the episode became one of the most discussed in the show's history, generated more IMDb text than almost any episode before it, and introduced the worse than Hitler image that became a widely shared internet meme, which meant that even the episode's failures found their audience and shaped how people thought about the show's relationship with religion for years afterward. All of this, though, the Francis Griffin episodes, the Weinstein standoff, the Fonz church, the atheist dog being chased by a mob, was the show working within boundaries, specific characters, specific communities, specific arguments, even if they were clumsy ones. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What happened next was something different. The show stopped working within boundaries and made its single most sweeping statement about Christianity as a whole. Not through a character or a joke or a bad argument, but through an entire alternate universe where Christianity had never existed at all. And what that universe looked like, according to Family Guy, was 1,000 years ahead of our own. Section 6. No Dark Ages. Road to the Multiverse, and the show's most direct argument against Christianity. The episode opens at a county fair. Stewie has entered a pig in a competition and won. Brian asks where the pig came from. Stewie pulls out a remote control and explains, with the calm confidence of someone describing a perfectly ordinary household appliance, that he has built a device that allows travel between parallel universes. Each universe is the same place, Quahog, Rhode Island, but under different conditions. Some are only slightly different from the one they live in. Some are radically different. The device lets them jump between them. The first universe they visit is where the show plants its flag. Stewie explains it as they arrive. In this universe, Christianity never existed. Because Christianity never existed, the Dark Ages, which Stewie describes as the Dark Ages of scientific repression, never occurred. And because those Dark Ages never occurred, humanity is 1,000 years more technologically advanced than in the universe Stewie and Brian come from. Flying cars fill the sky above Quahog. A woman offers Brian a pill that will cure his allergies instantly. Someone mentions that HIV and AIDS are curable diseases in this world. The streets are clean. The technology is astonishing. Everything works. Brian is amazed. He looks around at this world and sees exactly what his own worldview, his own atheism, has always told him the world could be without religion slowing it down. This is the dream made visible. A world without Christianity is a world that is 1,000 years smarter, 1,000 years healthier, 1,000 years more capable of solving its own problems. Then Brian asks about the art. He has one question about what this world lost when it lost Christianity. What happened to all the religious art, the paintings, the sculptures, the architecture that Christianity inspired over centuries? Stewie takes him to the Sistine Chapel. The ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in this universe was not painted by Michelangelo, because Michelangelo had no Christianity to inspire him. Instead, the job was given to John Hinckley Jr., the man who shot President Ronald Reagan in 1981 and who spent decades in a psychiatric facility afterward. The ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in the world without Christianity is covered entirely with portraits of Jodie Foster, the actress who Hinckley had an obsession with at the time of the shooting. That is the joke. That is the only loss the show concedes. The art is gone, yes, but it has been replaced by a deranged man's portraits of a movie star. The world without Christianity is still, very clearly, the better world. One lunatic's ceiling paintings is the price the show is willing to acknowledge for the elimination of the Dark Ages and the arrival of flying cars and cured diseases. The trade-off, in Family Guy's telling, is not even close. The episode is called Road to the Multiverse. It aired on September 27th, 2009. It It was the first episode of Season 8, and the first episode produced after the 2007 to 2008 Writers Guild of America strike ended. It was written by Wellesley Wild. It was directed by Greg Colton, who won a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Animation for his storyboarding work on this specific episode at the 62nd Primetime Emmy Awards. The episode was watched by 10.17 million people during its original airing in the United States, which made it the most watched show on Fox that night. It received a 9.1 out of 10 on IMDb, making it one of the most beloved episodes the show has ever produced.
These numbers matter because they tell you something about how the episode landed. This is not a controversial episode that divided audiences.
This is a beloved episode that is remembered as one of the show's best. The universe without Christianity joke did not generate the kind of backlash that Not All Dogs Go to Heaven generated 8 months earlier. The argument was actually more sweeping. Not All Dogs argued that atheists are treated unfairly. Road to the Multiverse argued that Christianity set humanity back 1,000 years. And yet, Road to the Multiverse is the one people quote fondly. The difference is craft. Road to the Multiverse makes its argument through a spectacular visual joke rather than through a character delivering a speech. The Sistine Chapel ceiling, covered in Jodie Foster portraits, lands the point so cleanly, so quickly, and so absurdly that the argument slips in underneath the laughter before you have had time to decide whether you agree with it. The episode then visits a series of other alternate universes, each depicted in a different animation style. There is a Flintstones universe, where everyone speaks by adding the word rock into every sentence. There is a universe where Japan won World War II because the United States never dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. There is a Disney-style universe where everything is beautiful and clean and the characters burst into song, but where the Jewish neighbor Mort Goldman is hunted and attacked by the cheerful cartoon animals, which is the show's reference to rumors about Walt Disney's alleged anti-Semitism. There is a robot chicken universe. There is a universe entirely populated by gay men. There is a dog universe where dogs rule the world and humans are kept as pets, which Brian is reluctant to leave. The Christian universe is the first one. It comes before all of these others, which means it is the frame through which the rest of the episode is introduced. The show is saying, here is what the world without our dominant religion looks like. Now let us show you a bunch of other weird worlds. The placement is deliberate. The Christianity argument is not buried in the middle of the episode. It is the opening statement. What makes the argument complicated, and what the show does not address, which is worth noting, is that the history it describes is contested. The claim that Christianity caused the Dark Ages and held science back by 1,000 years is a real argument that real people make, but it is not universally accepted by historians. TV Tropes, in its analysis of the episode, pointed out several problems with the show's version of events. The Dark Ages were not primarily caused by Christianity being imposed on the world. They were caused by the collapse of the Roman Empire, which removed the political and economic structures that had supported learning and trade. Christian monks during those same Dark Ages were largely responsible for copying and preserving the books and texts that would otherwise have been lost entirely when Rome fell. The Catholic Church, while it did restrict some scientific ideas, the most famous example being its treatment of Galileo, also funded and supported a great deal of scientific work, particularly during the Renaissance. The universities of medieval Europe were almost entirely run by the church. Islamic scholars, who were themselves religious, were responsible for enormous advances in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine during the same period that the show labels as scientific repression caused by Christianity. None of this gets into the episode. The show makes its claim: Christianity caused the Dark Ages. No, Christianity means 1,000-year head start on science, and moves on. It does not engage with the counter-arguments. It does not need to, because it is a cartoon making a joke, not a history lecture. But it is worth knowing that the argument the show presents as obvious fact is considerably more complicated than the episode suggests. What the episode does engage with, honestly, is the aesthetic cost. The question Brian asks, what about all the art that Christianity inspired, is a real question. The Renaissance, which produced some of the most celebrated paintings, sculptures, and buildings in human history, was funded almost entirely by the Catholic Church. Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel because the Pope commissioned him to. Leonardo da Vinci's most famous religious works were made for religious institutions. Bach composed music for church services. The answer the show gives, here is a crazy man's portraits of Jodie Foster, is funny, but it is also the show acknowledging, however briefly, that the thing it is arguing against produced something real and beautiful that the world without it does not have.
The episode's critical reception was, as noted, overwhelmingly positive. The AV Club gave it a B+ and called it a solid start to the 8th season. IGN gave it a 9.6 out of 10 and called it creative and visually impressive with a relentless barrage of clever jokes. These reviews focused on the animation variety, the comedy construction, and the sheer ambition of fitting that many different visual styles into a single episode. Almost none of the contemporary reviews spent much time on the Christianity argument specifically. The joke landed so cleanly and was surrounded by so many other jokes that it was absorbed and moved on from without much friction. This is the opposite of what happened with Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, where the atheism argument was so exposed and so central to the episode's structure that it could not be absorbed and moved on from. Road to the Multiverse hides its theology inside spectacle. Not All Dogs Go to Heaven put its theology on a stage and asked you to look at it directly. The former was beloved. The latter was a mistake that MacFarlane apologized for. The lesson, if there is one, is that Family Guy's religion arguments land best when they arrive inside something bigger, a visual gag, a universe-hopping adventure, a show about a very stupid man doing very stupid things, and worst when they arrive naked, as pure argument, with nothing around them to absorb the impact. Road to the Multiverse became so associated with this particular argument that the show returned to the exact same premise 15 years later in season 22, using the same characters, Stewie and Brian, to erase Christianity from existence again, this time for different reasons and with different results. The 2024 episode is a direct descendant of this one. The argument is the same. The delivery is different. We will get to that episode in detail later. __quote _8 __. But before we get there, the show had more religions to get through. The one it handled most carelessly, the one that got pulled from every streaming platform and became the center of a conspiracy theory about a terrorist attack, involves a man named Mahmoud, a terrorist cell, and an unfortunate cutaway gag about the Boston Marathon that the show could not have known would become unwatchable 1 month after it aired. Section 7. The Islam episode that got pulled off the internet. Quote 9 and the Boston Marathon. On March 17, 2013, Family Guy aired an episode called Turban Cowboy. It was the 15th episode of season 11. It got a 2.4 rating in the 18 to 49 demographic on the night it aired, which made it the most watched show on Fox's Sunday animation lineup that evening, beating The Simpsons, Bob's Burgers, and The Cleveland Show. By any standard measurement, it was a successful broadcast. Over 4.5 million people watched it live. 30 days later, the Boston Marathon bombing happened, and Fox pulled the episode off the internet so fast it was almost like it had never existed. To understand why, you need to know what is in the episode. And to understand what is in the episode, you need to start at the beginning, which involves a flagpole and Peter Griffin's lower body. The episode opens with Peter, Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe deciding they need to shake up their boring lives. Peter suggests skydiving. They go. Peter loves it. He keeps going back, and each time he jumps, he lands badly. One of these bad landings puts him in the hospital, where he ends up in a room with another patient named Mahmoud. Mahmoud is a Muslim man, friendly and warm, and he and Peter get along immediately. Peter likes Mahmoud. The show wants you to see that Peter likes Mahmoud, because what happens later is supposed to carry some weight. Peter introduces Mahmoud to his friends at the Drunken Clam. This is where the episode begins its slide. Mahmoud does not drink. Mahmoud does not look at other women. Quagmire and Joe find they have nothing in common with him, and the show plays this as comedy.
Peter's group of friends, whose defining activities are drinking and looking at women, having nothing to say to a man who does neither. This is a real cultural difference the show could have done something interesting with. Instead, it uses it as a quick joke and moves on. Mahmoud introduces Peter to Islam. Peter becomes interested. He starts studying. Lois has concerns, but decides to let it pass, which is a more reasonable reaction than the show usually gives Lois when Peter does something unusual. Peter's reasons for finding Islam appealing, as the episode presents them, include the hats and the fact that Mahmoud's wife is obedient to her husband. Peter says this out loud. He likes that Muslim women do what their husbands say. He converts partly because of this. The show has now said two things about Islam in quick succession. 1. Muslim men do not drink or socialize normally. 2. Muslim women are obedient to their husbands, and this is appealing to a man like Peter Griffin. These are stereotypes. The show knows they are stereotypes. Brian, in a scene that the episode presents as self-aware comedy, congratulates Peter for making a Muslim friend in a way that is so obviously performative and self-congratulatory that it is meant to make Brian look foolish. The show is trying to signal that it knows it is in uncomfortable territory. The signal is not strong enough to do the work it needs to do. Peter continues converting. He learns phrases, he starts saying Allahu Akbar in situations where it does not belong, which is a joke the show treats as innocent mispractice. There is a cutaway gag where Peter wins the Boston Marathon by driving his car through the crowd of runners, mowing them down, and crossing the finish line in his vehicle, while the runners he hit are scattered across the road behind him. This is played as a quick, absurdist joke, the kind Family Guy does constantly, a cutaway that has nothing to do with anything and exists only to be shocking and then disappear. It did not disappear. On April 15th, 2013, 30 days after Turban Cowboy aired, 2 bombs exploded near the finish line of the Boston Marathon. 3 people were killed. Hundreds were injured. The bombers were later identified as 2 brothers with a background connected to radical Islam. Fox pulled Turban Cowboy from Fox.com, Amazon, and Hulu within days of the bombing. The network released a statement saying it had no immediate plans to broadcast the episode again. The episode vanished from every legal streaming platform it had been on. Then something else happened. A video began circulating online that had been edited together by someone who took the Boston Marathon cutaway from Turban Cowboy and combined it with a different scene from the same episode. A scene where Peter is with the terrorist cell and remote-controlled bombs are being detonated. The edited video made it appear as though the episode showed Peter winning the Boston Marathon by detonating bombs at the finish line. This was not what the episode showed. These were 2 completely separate scenes that had been cut together to create a false impression. The conspiracy theorist and radio host Alex Jones broadcast this edited video on his InfoWars platform and on Twitter, claiming that the Family Guy episode had predicted the Boston Marathon bombing, or had in some way inspired it. The claim spread rapidly. It was not true. The 2 scenes in the edited video were not connected in the actual episode. The Boston Marathon joke was a separate cutaway about Peter driving a car, not a bomb. The bomb scenes were from an entirely different part of the plot. But the edited video was seen by enormous numbers of people before the corrections caught up with it, and a significant portion of those people believed they were watching something real. This is what the episode became. Not an argument about how Family Guy handles Islam. Not a debate about stereotypes and comedy. A conspiracy theory about whether a cartoon predicted a terrorist attack. The episode was not restored to Hulu until September 2022, which means it was absent from legal streaming for 9 years. As of the writing of this video, the partial Terms of Endearment episode, which dealt with abortion and never aired on American television at all, remains the only episode completely absent from Hulu. Turban Cowboy is back. It took 9 years. Now, setting aside the bombing and the conspiracy theory and the 9-year disappearance, there is still the question of what the episode actually does with Islam before all of that happened. The answer, according to the critics who reviewed it at the time, is not very much. The AV Club gave the episode a D. The reviewer, Kevin McFarland, wrote that Turban Cowboy felt like an episode made in 2002 and left on a shelf for a decade, completely unaware of how uniformly Middle Eastern characters are depicted as terrorists in American media. The review argued that the show's treatment of the topic was not bold or daring, but simply outdated, that the Muslim equals terrorist storyline was so well worn by 2013 that using it as a plot twist was not shocking, just tired. A religious studies scholar named A. David Lewis, who had converted to Islam himself and reviewed the episode for a religious media publication, called it lazy rather than offensive. He said the show squandered the opportunity to say anything real about Islam or about America's relationship with it. He noted that the stereotypes the episode employed, Muslims are not hygienic, Muslims eat strange food, Muslim women are fully controlled by their husbands, Muslim men are secretly planning violence, were so predictable that even the episode's attempt to complicate them, in the form of Joe saying that not all Muslims are terrorists, felt forced. TV tropes described this Joe moment as a broken Aesop, a lesson the episode tries to teach that is completely undermined by the fact that the entire plot depends on the stereotype the lesson is trying to reject. The core problem, as Lewis identified it, is the same problem that runs through the show's treatment of Islam more broadly. Family Guy is built on the comedy of stereotype. Every group that appears on the show appears through a simplified version of itself. The joke is that the simplification is wrong, or extreme, or being filtered through Peter Griffin's spectacular ignorance. This works, when it works, because Peter's ignorance is the target. When Peter says he converted to Islam because of the hats and the obedient wife, the joke is supposed to be on Peter. But the show then builds a plot that validates the stereotype. Mahmoud really is a terrorist recruiter. The Muslim men Peter joins really are planning to blow up a bridge. And at that point, the joke is no longer on Peter. The joke is on Mahmoud. The joke is on the entire community Mahmoud represents. Peter accidentally blows up the Quahog Bridge with the remote detonator he has been given by the terrorist cell, not knowing what it is. The bridge collapses. This is played for comedy. In the years since the episode aired, TV Tropes has noted that this scene became additionally uncomfortable after the real-life collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which is the kind of coincidence that tends to follow Family Guy around. The episode received a 6.6 on IMDb, which is notably lower than the show's average for the period. The reviews split between viewers who found it funny and irreverent in the way they expected Family Guy to be, and viewers who found it lazy, dated, and counterproductive. What is notable is that the negative reviews came from multiple directions. Muslim viewers found it offensive, non-Muslim viewers who wanted better comedy found it sloppy. Academic analysis cited it as an example of Islamophobic narrative patterns in American media. And religious reviewers pointed out what they saw as a double standard. The show had done full episodes deeply exploring Christianity and Judaism, but its one major Islam episode reduced the entire religion to terrorist recruitment and obedient wives. That double standard question is one we will spend a full section on later in this video. Because the pattern of which religions get full episode treatment and which get reduced to punchlines is not random. It follows a logic, and that logic tells you something real about the show's worldview and its limitations. But before we get to the pattern, we need to talk about the character at the center of the show's religion universe. Not Peter, not Brian, not Francis, but the character who has been depicted in more ways and in more episodes than any other religious figure in the show's history. A character who has been a record store worker, a celebrity, a virgin, and a stand-up comedian who gets crucified for a bad joke. __quote _10__. That character is Jesus Christ. And Family Guy has been doing things with him since the very beginning. Section 8. Jesus as Celebrity. Quote 11, quote 12, and the recurring Christ problem. There is a moment in the 7th season of Family Guy where Peter Griffin walks into a used record store in Quahog and notices that the man working behind the counter looks extremely familiar. The man has long hair. He has a beard. He looks, Peter realizes, exactly like every painting Peter has ever seen of Jesus Christ. Peter stares. The man shifts uncomfortably. Peter keeps staring. And then the man behind the counter confirms it. Yes, it is him. Jesus Christ, Son of God, central figure of the world's largest religion, is working a shift at a record store in Rhode Island. He is hiding. He is not ready to reveal himself yet. He is waiting for the right moment. He has been waiting, apparently, for quite some time, and in the meantime, he needs something to do. So he has been working at Dead Format Records, selling second-hand vinyl to the people of Quahog, hoping nobody notices him. Peter notices him. This is the premise of I Dream of Jesus, the second episode of Season 7, which aired on October 5th, 2008. It was written by Brian Scully and directed by Mike Kim. According to Nielsen ratings, it was the most watched program on Fox the night it aired, drawing 8.4 million viewers and earning a 4.3 out of 10 rating in the 18 to 49 demographic. Seth MacFarlane was nominated for a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Voiceover Performance for his work as Peter Griffin in this episode. It is, by any standard measure, one of the most watched and most decorated episodes in the show's history. And it is an episode where Jesus Christ uses his supernatural powers to make Lois Griffin's breasts larger, at Peter Griffin's request. That sentence is factual. It happened in the episode. Peter asks, Jesus does it, the show moves on. This is what Family Guy does with Jesus that no other major American animated show has done with the same consistency or the same commitment. It does not treat Jesus as a symbol or a concept or a figure to be discussed from a distance. It makes Jesus a character, a recurring character with a personality, a social life, personal problems, and a very human set of desires and frustrations. Over the course of the show's run, Jesus has appeared in multiple episodes across multiple seasons, voiced first by Seth MacFarlane himself and later by writer Alex Sulkin, who took over the role in more recent seasons. In I Dream of Jesus, the plot works like this. Peter convinces Jesus to reveal himself to the world. Jesus agrees, partly because Peter is enthusiastic, and partly because, as the episode establishes, Jesus has been waiting a long time and is ready. Once Jesus goes public, the response is exactly what you would expect if a celebrity announced themselves in the modern world. Jesus becomes famous. Not spiritually famous, actually famous, in the way that movie stars and pop singers are famous. He appears at Paris Hilton's party. He goes on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. He performs at the MTV Video Music Awards. Magazines put him on their covers. His face is everywhere. Then the celebrity lifestyle does what the celebrity lifestyle does. Jesus overdoses. He gets arrested. The whole public revelation turns into a tabloid disaster, and Jesus decides the world is not ready after all and retreats back into hiding. Before he leaves, he gives Peter a gift, a new copy of Surfin' Bird by the Trashmen, which is the song Peter had been obsessing over for the first half of the episode. The family groans. The episode ends. The Jesus plot in this episode received mixed reviews. IGN gave the episode a 7 out of 10 and specifically noted that Jesus on Family Guy should have been a bigger deal and generated more laughs than it did. The AV Club's review praised the Surfin' Bird sections of the episode, but said the Jesus story was abrupt and that there was a lot of ground the show did not cover that it clearly wanted to. These are fair criticisms. The episode is remembered more for Surfin' Bird than for anything it does with Jesus, which tells you something about how the Jesus material landed on first viewing. But I Dream of Jesus is not the most interesting Jesus episode in the show's history. It is the first full episode to use him as a main character, which makes it the foundation everything else is built on. The more interesting episodes come later, when the show has established Jesus firmly enough as a recurring presence that it can do more uncomfortable things with him. The 2,000-Year-Old Virgin aired as the 6th episode of Season 13. The title is a play on the 1965 film The 2,000-Year-Old Man, which was a comedy record and later a movie featuring Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner. In this episode, Peter and Lois are Christmas shopping at the Quahog Mall when they bump into Jesus. Peter is excited to see him. They make plans to celebrate Jesus' birthday properly, since Peter feels bad that Christmas has become so commercialized that the actual person whose birth it celebrates gets lost in the shopping and the decorations. Peter takes Jesus out with the guys, himself, Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe, for a birthday night out. Over the course of the evening, it comes up that Jesus is still a virgin. He has never been with anyone. He has been alive for 2,000 years and has never had that experience. Peter decides, with the uncomplicated certainty that Peter brings to all decisions, that this needs to be fixed and that he is going to be the one to fix it. Peter's solution involves offering his wife Lois to Jesus for the night. He suggests this to Lois. Lois, after some consideration, agrees, because it is Jesus. The show plays this straight. Lois agrees to sleep with Jesus as a birthday gift, arranged by her husband, because the man in question is the Son of God, and she considers this sufficient justification. The episode was received as one of the stronger holiday-themed episodes in the show's recent history. It has a 7.8 on IMDb. The Jesus characterization in this episode is softer and more sympathetic than in I Dream of Jesus. Jesus is depicted here as genuinely lonely, genuinely uncertain, someone who has been alive for 2 millennia and has still not figured out the basic parts of human connection. There is something almost sad about it, underneath the comedy. What both episodes share, and what makes them significant as a pair, is the specific move they make with Jesus as a character. They take the central figure of the world's largest religion, the person that over 2 billion people on Earth consider to be the Son of God, and they put him in situations that are recognizably human and small. Waiting for the right moment while working a retail job. Going out for his birthday and finding out his friend has arranged a sexual encounter for him as a present. These are not situations that expand the theology of Jesus or engage with what Christianity teaches about him. They are situations that shrink him down to the level of a regular person with regular problems. That shrinking is the joke, and it is also the argument. If Jesus can be a record store employee waiting for the right moment, if Jesus can be a 2,000-year-old virgin who needs his friends to sort out his personal life, then the distance between Jesus and any other person in the show's universe becomes very small. He is not above the world looking down on it. He is in it, working shifts, going to parties, making the same kinds of decisions everyone else makes. In his earliest appearances on the show, before the full episodes, Jesus appeared in cutaway gags. The show's official wiki notes that a standing gag in the early seasons involves Jesus appearing in small moments to make quick jokes at Christianity's expense. The Surfin' Bird episode in season 7 was the first time he became the center of a full story rather than a background joke. By season 13, he was returning for holiday episodes as a recognizable recurring presence. The voice change is worth noting. In the early seasons, Seth MacFarlane voiced Jesus himself. MacFarlane is the voice of Peter, Brian, Stewie, and Quagmire, the show's 4 most prominent male characters. His voicing Jesus directly meant that the show's creator, the man who has described himself publicly as an atheist who thinks religion is something humanity should move past, was literally providing the voice for the figure at the center of Christianity. In later seasons, writer Alex Sulkin took over the role. Sulkin is one of the show's longtime writers and executive producers, and his version of Jesus is slightly different in tone. More casual, more conversational, less the wide-eyed figure of I Dream of Jesus, and more the comfortable recurring guest of the later holiday episodes. The Jesus character culminates, in terms of what the show does with him, in the 2024 episode Faith No More, which we will cover in full detail later. In that episode, Jesus is depicted in ancient Israel, and Brian travels back in time to convince him to abandon his mission and become a stand-up comedian instead. Jesus performs stand-up comedy. He makes a joke about his mother's virginity from the stage. He is ultimately crucified anyway, not for being the Messiah, but for telling an offensive joke about Assyrians at what the episode depicts as a college campus performance. The crucifixion in this version of events is not a theological event. It is a cancel culture joke. The accumulation of these portrayals over 15+ years of television represents something that is worth stepping back and looking at as a whole. Jesus in Family Guy is not mocked in the way that, for example, a political figure is mocked. He is not being accused of hypocrisy or corruption or specific wrongdoing. He is being domesticated. He is being brought down to human scale, given human problems, placed in human situations, and allowed to be funny in the way that any human character on the show is funny, by being confused, or wanting things, or making bad decisions, or finding himself in circumstances he did not plan for. Whether you find this offensive or funny probably depends on where you stand on the broader question of whether sacred figures should be available for comedy at all. Family Guy's answer to that question has always been clear and consistent. Everyone is available. No figure, no matter how significant to how many people, gets to be off limits. That commitment to equal availability is the show's stated principle. Whether the show lives up to that principle across all religions equally is a different question. One that the show's treatment of Islam, compared to its treatment of Christianity and Jesus specifically, raises pretty clearly. That question of who gets the full treatment and who gets the lazy stereotype, which religions get recurring characters and which get one episode full of tired jokes, is something the show has never directly answered. But the pattern is visible once you start looking for it. And the clearest way to see the pattern is to look at the show's religion catalog as a whole. To ask which groups got their own banned episode, their own recurring character, their own full theological argument, and which groups got a flagpole joke and a terrorist cell. Because the answer tells you something real about what the show is actually willing to say, and to whom, and at what cost. But before we get to that accounting, there is one character in the show's religion universe who has been treated more broadly and more extensively than Jesus, than Francis Griffin, than Brian Griffin, than any single human figure. A character who appears across decades of episodes as a womanizer, an irritable ex-smoker, a delivery driver, and an authority figure who enforces belief through noogies. __quote _13___. That character is God himself. And what Family Guy has done with God over 25 years is unlike anything any other major animated show has attempted. Section 9. God as a Character. The show's most blasphemous running joke. Most shows that deal with religion keep God at a distance. They might reference him, they might have characters pray to him, they might debate whether he exists, but they do not put him on screen with a speaking part, a bad mood, and a personal life. The risk is too high, the potential for offense too broad, the theological minefield too dense. Most shows look at all of that and decide to keep God where he has always been in polite television. Implied, referenced, prayed to, but never present. Family Guy looked at all of that and gave God a recurring role. Not a symbolic presence, not a voice from the clouds delivering wisdom. A character. A man on screen with a body and a face and a specific personality who makes decisions for bad reasons, who has social problems, who gets irritable when he quits smoking, who can be tracked down and found and argued with, and who, in at least one episode, is reduced to working as a delivery driver for UPS because nobody believes in him anymore. The official Family Guy wiki describes the show's depiction of God as one of the most controversial components of the series. It notes that God is portrayed in a less than flattering, if not outright sacrilegious light, across the episodes and cutaway gags where he appears. The traditional Western visual depiction is used throughout. White hair, white beard, white robe, large frame, the image that has appeared in Christian art for centuries. The show takes that image and puts it in situations that the people who created that image almost certainly never imagined. God's physical appearance on the show is the traditional artistic depiction of the Abrahamic God that most Western audiences would recognize. He looks exactly like the paintings. He looks like the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel that the show visited in Road to the Multiverse, before John Hinckley Jr. got to it. The show uses this recognizable image deliberately, because the comedy requires the audience to immediately know who this is. There is no introduction needed. You see the white beard and the robe, and you know. And then the show puts that immediately recognizable figure into a situation that depends entirely on how much you were not expecting him to be there. The earliest appearances of God in the show were mostly cutaway gags. Quick moments, in and out, where the existence of a God character is established and a joke is made, and the episode moves on. These early appearances set up the baseline for what the show believes God is like as a person, which is useful to know before you get to the full episode appearances. The baseline is, God is an older man with significant personal flaws, an inconsistent approach to his responsibilities, and a tendency to make decisions based on what he finds entertaining, rather than what would be good for the people he is supposed to be watching over. In I Dream of Jesus, the episode establishes through a cutaway gag that God has recently quit smoking. Because he has quit smoking, he has been on edge. He has been irritable. Small things are setting him off. Jesus explains this to Peter as part of the context for why Jesus has come back to earth, partly to get away from a difficult atmosphere in heaven while God manages his nicotine withdrawal. This is a 30-second piece of the episode, not its focus, but it tells you everything about how the show positions God. He is a being of infinite power who is cranky because he stopped smoking. The humor comes from the complete mismatch between what God is supposed to be, eternal, all-knowing, above human weakness, and what the show depicts him as, which is a large man in a bad mood because he is trying to be healthier. In 3 Acts of God, which is the 13th episode of Season 12, God is the direct focus of the plot in a way that the earlier cutaway appearances were not. Peter, Quagmire, Cleveland, and Joe are watching a New England Patriots game. The Patriots keep losing. The men are frustrated. Peter decides, with his usual complete certainty, that he has identified both the problem and the solution, that God is personally intervening in NFL games on behalf of teams whose players pray more sincerely than the Patriots players do. He concludes that the only solution is to find God and ask him to stop. The 4 of them travel the world visiting different religious communities. The episode uses this as its framework for looking at how God is understood across different traditions, hoping that someone will know where God is and how to reach him. They eventually find him. And God confirms Peter's theory. He says yes, he does intervene in football games. He does it for the players who pray to him more sincerely. He is aware that this is favoritism. He does not particularly care. This version of God, engaged in the small vanities of human sport, willing to tip the results of athletic competitions based on who flatters him most sincerely in prayer, is the show's most direct statement about what it thinks belief in divine intervention actually amounts to. Prayer, in this framing, is not communication with a being of infinite wisdom and love. It is flattery directed at a large man with preferences and the power to act on them. The more you flatter him, the better your football team does. This is not a theological position. It is a comedy bit, but it is a comedy bit with a point. And the point is that the idea of God intervening in human affairs in response to individual prayers is, when you actually draw it out and look at it, pretty strange. The God character in this episode is not presented as malicious. He is presented as exactly what the show has always presented him as, a being with enormous power and fairly ordinary human psychology. He has preferences, he responds to flattery, he is not particularly interested in being fair. He is not cruel, but he is also not especially good. He is just powerful, and he uses that power in ways that reflect his mood rather than any grand plan. The most revealing version of God in the show's history comes in Faith No More, the 2024 episode where Brian and Stewie erase first Christianity and then Judaism from existence. Once both religions are gone, and the world exists without any faith in the God of the Abrahamic traditions, God loses his worshippers. Without people to believe in him, his status changes. He is no longer the all-powerful creator of the universe with billions of followers. He is a man without a job. He becomes a UPS delivery driver. This is the show's most complete statement about the relationship between God and belief. Without the belief, God does not simply continue existing in divine isolation, unconcerned with what humans think. Without the belief, God becomes ordinary. He gets a uniform and a delivery route. He shows up at doors with packages. He is not happy about this. When he tracks down Stewie and Brian to confront them about what they have done, he does not arrive as an avenging deity of terrible power. He arrives as a frustrated middle-aged delivery worker who is extremely annoyed that his entire operation has been shut down. His method of punishment is noogies. He grabs Stewie and Brian and gives them noogies, the childhood move where you press your knuckles into someone's head and grind, until they agree to restore religion and give him his worshippers back. Stewie, mid-noogie, asks the question that is the episode's actual point. Is this all religion is? Threatening to noogie people if they dare to think for themselves? God does not answer this philosophically. He just keeps applying the noogies until they comply. The image of God as a noogie-dispensing delivery driver is the furthest the show has ever gone with the God character, and it represents the logical endpoint of everything the show has been building toward with him since his earliest appearances. God in Family Guy starts as a cranky man who quit smoking, and ends as an angry delivery worker who enforces belief through physical coercion. The journey from one to the other is a portrait of a worldview, specifically Seth MacFarlane's worldview, about what God actually is. Not a being of infinite wisdom and love, a construct that needs human belief to function, that uses whatever power it has to maintain that belief, and that, without that belief, is just another guy with a uniform and a route. Entertainment Weekly published an article accusing the show of anti-Christian bigotry, citing the God character specifically. The website Answers in Genesis, which is a Christian organization, published a similar piece. The Parents Television Council, which has campaigned against Family Guy for much of its existence, pointed to the God depiction as evidence of what they called the show's systematic contempt for religion. These responses came at different points across the show's run, in response to different episodes, but they are all responding to the same thing: the accumulation of a consistent portrait of God as flawed, small, needy, and ultimately dependent on the humans he is supposed to be watching over. What is interesting about the God character, when you look at the full arc, is that the show does not depict him as non-existent. This is not the Richard Dawkins argument that God is a delusion and therefore not present at all. Family Guy's God is very much present. He exists. He has a body and a voice and a delivery route. The show's argument is not that God does not exist. The show's argument is that God existing does not settle any of the questions people think it settles. He exists, and he is petty. He exists, and he quits smoking and gets irritable. He exists, and he tips football games based on who flatters him most. He exists, and he resorts to noogies. The existence of God in Family Guy's universe is not good news. It is just another complicated fact about a universe full of complicated facts. This is a more specific and more interesting theological position than simple atheism, and it is one that the show has maintained consistently across 25 years. Brian Griffin is the atheist, the character who does not believe. But the show itself, as a whole, seems to believe something slightly different, which is that even if God is real, the reality of God does not justify the weight that human institutions have placed on that reality. The church, the doctrine, the wars, the shame, the noogies, none of that follows necessarily from a large man in a white robe existing somewhere. The institutions built around that existence are human inventions, and the show treats them as such. God has appeared in more episodes than can be listed here. He has appeared in cutaway gags too numerous to count. He has appeared in holiday episodes, in time travel plots, in direct confrontations with the main characters. He has been a womanizer in some gags, a loving father in others, an irritable man working through his own issues in several more. The show has never settled on a single, consistent version of him, because the comedy requires flexibility. Sometimes the joke is that God is petty, sometimes the joke is that God is distracted, sometimes the joke is that God does not care as much as people think he does. But the core of the character, across all of those variations, has always been the same. God in Family Guy is a being with power and without wisdom, a being who responds to flattery and ignores suffering, a being who enforces his own relevance through threat rather than through love, a being who, without the belief of his followers, is just a man with a package to deliver. The show has spent 25 years building this portrait, and as we will see in the sections ahead, the portraits it drew of other religions, Islam, Hinduism, Mormonism, the ones that got single episodes and quick jokes rather than recurring characters and full theological arguments, are considerably less developed, considerably less committed, and considerably less willing to go to the uncomfortable places that the God and Jesus and Francis Griffin material went to. That imbalance is the most revealing thing about Family Guy's relationship with religion. Not what it attacks, but what it leaves alone. And why. Section 10. The Selective Targeting Debate. What religion did Family Guy leave alone, and why? There is a complaint that shows up in the comment sections, the review threads, and the message boards wherever Family Guy's religion episodes are discussed. It appears in the IMDb reviews for Not All Dogs Go to Heaven. It appears in the reviews for Turban Cowboy. It appears in discussions of the Weinstein episode and the Fonz episode and Faith No More. It is not always phrased the same way, but it is always asking the same question. Why does the show keep going after Christianity? The people asking this question are not always Christians defending their own faith. Some of them are, but plenty of the people raising the concern are not religious at all. They are asking a structural question about the show, about which targets it chooses, how much effort it puts into those targets, and whether the show that claims to treat everyone equally actually does. And when you lay out the evidence carefully and look at it honestly, the answer to that question is more complicated than either the show's defenders or its critics usually allow. Let us start with what the evidence actually shows. Christianity has received, across the show's run, the following treatment. A recurring character, Francis Griffin, who appeared across multiple seasons as the show's most detailed portrait of religious extremism. A recurring character who is God himself, appearing across dozens of episodes with a speaking role and a consistent personality. A recurring character who is Jesus Christ, who has appeared across multiple full episodes and numerous cutaway gags, voiced first by Seth MacFarlane himself. 3 full episodes that directly and centrally engage with Christian theology, Holy Crap, Not All Dogs Go to Heaven, and Road to the Multiverse, plus Faith No More in 2024. A banned episode that sat in a drawer for 4 years because Fox was nervous about one lyric in a song that referenced Jewish identity, which is inseparable from the Abrahamic tradition Christianity grew from. Academic papers, entertainment magazine articles, and a sustained campaign from the Parents Television Council in response to the sheer volume and depth of the show's engagement with Christian content. Judaism has received one major full episode, When You Wish Upon a Weinstein, that was held by Fox for 4 years, vetted by rabbis, written by a Jewish writer, and is now considered one of the stronger episodes of the show's early run. The Jewish neighbor Mort Goldman is a recurring background character whose identity is regularly referenced for jokes, and multiple critics and Jewish media outlets have pointed out that those jokes lean on financial stereotypes. The 3 Acts of God episode uses a world tour of different religious traditions as its frame, which touches on Judaism. The Faith No More episode erases Judaism alongside Christianity in its time travel plot. Islam has received one major full episode, Turban Cowboy, which received a D from the AV Club, was called lazy by a religious studies scholar who is himself a Muslim convert, was pulled from every streaming platform for 9 years following the Boston Marathon bombing, and is now generally regarded as one of the weaker attempts at religious satire in the show's history. Hinduism has received a single scene in The Father, the Son, and the Holy Fonz, where Peter tackles a guru to the floor because he mistakes a bindi for a sniper's laser sight. The scene is approximately 30 seconds long. There is no follow-up. There is no deeper engagement. The entire Hindu tradition is represented by one physical comedy beat and never returned to. Mormonism has received a scene in the same episode where Peter converts because of polygamy and leaves because Mormons cannot drink. This is also approximately 30 seconds long. Jehovah's Witnesses have received a scene in the same episode where Peter stands at a door with nothing to say. Also approximately 30 seconds. Buddhism does not appear as a serious subject at all across the show's run. Scientology has been referenced in cutaway gags, but has never been the subject of a full episode or a sustained argument. Now look at that list. Look at the difference in depth, in commitment, in the number of episodes and recurring characters, and full theological arguments. Christianity gets Francis Griffin and God and Jesus and Brian's atheism and a banned episode and multiple full season arcs. Hinduism gets a 30-second tackle. Islam gets one lazy episode that the network had to pull off the internet. This is the pattern that viewers across multiple backgrounds have pointed to, and it is a real pattern. The question is what explains it. The most straightforward explanation is personal. Seth MacFarlane grew up Catholic. Danny Smith, who wrote the majority of the show's religion episodes, grew up Catholic. The show's religion satire is deepest and most detailed in the territory these men know personally, because personal knowledge produces specific comedy. Francis Griffin is a detailed, three-dimensional portrait of religious extremism because someone in that writer's room grew up near Francis Griffin. The nuns chasing Peter at the end of the Weinstein episode, the baptism with tainted holy water, the Pope tour, these details come from inside knowledge. You cannot write a joke about tainted holy water unless you grew up knowing what holy water was and what it meant to people. The Hinduism tackle and the Islam terrorist plot do not come from inside knowledge. They come from outside looking in. And the comedy of outside looking in is almost always shallower than the comedy of inside looking out. This is not a moral failing, it is a creative limitation. The show does its best work with the material it knows most intimately. And it knows Christianity most intimately because that is where its creators came from. But the personal explanation does not fully account for the gap. Because the show's treatment of Islam is not just shallower than its treatment of Christianity, it is also notably more cautious in a specific way. The IMDb reviews for Turban Cowboy contain exactly this observation, made by multiple reviewers who are not Muslim and who are not trying to defend Islam from criticism. They note that the show seems reluctant to do to Islam what it does to Christianity, and that the one episode it did produce about Islam was both lazy and more stereotypical than the show's usual approach. One reviewer phrased the specific concern directly. The show targets certain groups much more thoroughly than others, and the groups it hits hardest are the ones whose members are least likely to respond with anything other than letters to Fox. This is an uncomfortable point, but it is a point that religious studies scholar A. David Lewis made in his review of Turban Cowboy from a position of genuine expertise and personal faith. He did not accuse the show of cowardice directly, but he noted that the episode squandered its opportunity to say anything real, and that there are funny things to say about Islam, real contradictions, real tensions, real material for comedy, that the episode did not touch. It went for the easiest, most expected version of Muslim representation in American media, which is the terrorism plot, rather than the more interesting and more specific material that genuine engagement with a tradition would have produced. The double standard argument has come from within the show's own audience as well. The IMDb reviews for Not All Dogs Go to Heaven include a reviewer who makes this point precisely. The show is happy to say that anyone who believes in God is wrong, which includes every Muslim, every Hindu, every Jew, every Buddhist, every person of any faith watching the show. But when it comes to giving those traditions the same detailed, sustained, multi-episode treatment it gives Christianity, the show does not follow through. It makes the blanket argument: religion is a human invention, belief is a mistake, and then directs most of its specific fire at one tradition while touching the others lightly or not at all. The Pop Matters academic analysis of the show's religious content, which is one of the more thorough scholarly treatments of the subject, notes that Family Guy draws most heavily from Christianity, particularly Catholicism, for its satire, because the character setup makes this almost inevitable. Peter Griffin is Irish-American and Catholic. His father is Catholic. His family background is Catholic. The show is built around a Catholic family, which means Catholic institutions, Catholic practices, and Catholic guilt are the natural material. The Lois and Francis conflict, Protestant wife, Catholic father-in-law, gives the show an automatic internal tension around religion that does not require any separate setup. The religion is already in the room before the episode begins. This structural point is real and worth acknowledging. The show did not choose to make its central religious conflict a Catholic one arbitrarily. It built a character, Peter Griffin, Irish-American, working class, Catholic, and followed the logic of who that character is. The religion satire grew from the character rather than being imposed on him from the outside. But the structural point only goes so far. Because the show has not been limited across 25 years to following only the implications of Peter's Catholicism. It made a full episode about Islam. It made a full episode about Judaism. It made episodes where Peter converts to Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses and Hinduism. It has the creative flexibility to engage with any tradition it chooses, and when it chooses, the depth of that engagement is wildly uneven. What this unevenness tells you, ultimately, is that Family Guy's claim to be an equal opportunity satirist of religion is not quite accurate. The show is a deeply personal satirist of the specific religion its creators grew up in, and a significantly less committed satirist of everything else. This does not make it dishonest, exactly. It makes it human. People go hardest at the things they know best and feel most personally connected to. McFarlane and his writers know Catholicism the way you know something you were raised in and left, with the specific anger and specific humor and specific detail that only comes from having been inside. The fair criticism is not that the show goes too hard at Christianity. The fair criticism is that it sometimes presents its very personal relationship with one specific religious tradition as a universal statement about all religion, when the evidence for that universal statement, across Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, and the rest, is considerably thinner than the evidence for the specific case against the tradition the show actually knows. The show has, across its run, generated reactions from multiple religious communities. Articles in Jewish publications called out the financial stereotypes in the Weinstein episode. The Haaretz piece in 2014 accused McFarlane of anti-Semitism in the 3 Acts of God episode. Academic papers cited Turban Cowboy in discussions of Islamophobic narrative patterns in American media. The Parents Television Council waged a multi-year campaign against the show for its treatment of Christianity specifically. Entertainment Weekly and Answers in Genesis both published pieces about the show's anti-Christian bias. The show managed, in other words, to draw complaints from all directions, which its defenders point to as evidence that it is hitting everyone equally. But drawing complaints from all directions is not the same thing as investing equally in all directions. A show can offend a community with a 30-second joke, and offend a different community with 10 years of recurring characters, and both communities will complain. The volume of complaint is the same. The depth of engagement is not. That gap between the depth of what the show does with Christianity and the shallowness of what it does with almost everything else is the most honest answer to the question of whether Family Guy is actually the equal opportunity religion satirist it claims to be. For Christianity, it built a cathedral of comedy, 25 years tall, with recurring characters and full theological arguments, and episodes that McFarlane himself later apologized for. For Hinduism, it built a 30-second tackle gag and moved on. Both got a joke, only one got a church. Now, to see the full extent of what that church looks like, to see the most complete, most sweeping, most ambitious thing the show has ever done with religion in a single episode, we need to go to 2024, to season 22, to an episode where Brian Griffin erases Christianity because a woman would not sleep with him, erases Judaism because he found out what Shabbat was, and ends up in a world where God is a disgruntled UPS delivery driver giving out noogies. __quote_15___. That episode is the final destination of everything the show has been building toward since Francis Griffin walked through the front door in 1999. Section 11. The Time Machine That Wouldn't Quit. Faith No More, 2024. And What Happens When the Same Joke Runs for 25 Years? The episode begins at a veterinary clinic. Brian is getting a new tracking chip installed. The nurse doing the procedure is a woman named Emma, voiced by Mae Whitman. Emma has a dog-friendly lifestyle. She has dog treats, she scratches Brian in the right spots, she is everything Brian would want in a person who is also, unfortunately for Brian, an evangelical Christian. Brian immediately falls for her. He pushes through his reservations about her faith and asks her out. Their date is at a Christian rock concert. The show does not linger on this setting for long, but it uses it efficiently. The concert is depicted as wholesome to the point of being slightly strange, full of people who are enthusiastic in the specific, contained way that Christian social events tend to be enthusiastic. Brian is visibly uncomfortable, but pressing on because Emma is attractive and he is Brian Griffin, which means his desire is always stronger than his better judgment. After the concert, Brian tries to take things further. Emma says no, she is Christian. She does not believe in sex before marriage. Brian pushes back. He points out that she has tattoos of Bible verses, she explains. He points out that she scratched his spot earlier, which he clearly took as a signal. She tells him clearly that it was not a signal and that he should leave. Brian goes home furious. He finds Stewie and delivers a speech that begins with the line, "Christianity sucks. It is stupid, arbitrary nonsense." Stewie, who knows Brian extremely well, immediately identifies the real cause of the complaint. He tells Brian that Brian is horny and the woman would not sleep with him. Brian does not dispute this, but continues his argument anyway. He says that so much of the division and hatred in the world comes from Christianity, that it is hypocritical, that it is the worst thing that ever happened to the country or the world. Stewie's response is the line that the episode uses to puncture Brian's argument before Brian has even fully made it. He tells Brian that perhaps that is true, but Christianity has been around for 2,000 years, and it is not like there is anything Brian can do about it. He then says he is going to bed and delivers one final observation. He will leave Brian to watch John Oliver and agree with himself. Brian does not go to bed. Brian goes to Stewie's room, where the time machine lives, and uses it. This is the episode's central joke and its central argument running simultaneously. Brian Griffin, who has spent the entire show's history presenting himself as the intellectual, the progressive, the critical thinker who sees through what everyone else accepts. Brian Griffin is erasing Christianity from human history because a woman would not sleep with him. The motivation is completely, deliberately, humiliatingly personal. It is not a philosophical position. It is not a principled stand. It is a dog who got rejected and decided to take it out on 2,000 years of religious history. The show is aware of this. It is not an accident. The writers built the episode this way on purpose, and the purpose is to make Brian look exactly as ridiculous as he is being. The show has always had a complicated relationship with Brian as its atheist mouthpiece, sometimes taking his arguments seriously, sometimes undercutting them, sometimes both at the same time. Faith No More falls firmly into the undercutting category. Brian's atheism in this episode is not presented as a thoughtful position. It is presented as a convenient justification for something much pettier. Brian travels to 30 AD in search of Jesus. He finds him in ancient Israel. Jesus, in this episode, is depicted as a young Jewish man who is in the middle of his ministry, but who confesses to Brian, in a private conversation, that he never actually wanted to be the Messiah. What Jesus wanted, his whole life, was to do stand-up comedy. He has the material, he has the timing, he just got swept into the whole Messiah situation and has been going along with it. Brian, hearing this, does what Brian always does. He encourages Jesus to follow his authentic self. He tells Jesus to go talk to God and be honest about what he wants. Jesus does this. God, after initial resistance, gives in and allows Jesus to pursue stand-up comedy instead of his messianic mission. Jesus performs stand-up. He is good at it. His set includes a joke about his mother's virginity, delivered from the stage to an ancient audience. The audience responds well. Jesus is living his dream. Then he performs at what the episode depicts as a college campus event and tells a joke about Assyrians. The campus audience finds the joke offensive. Jesus is crucified for it. This sequence is the episode doing two things at the same time. It is making the religion joke. Jesus, stripped of his mission, still ends up crucified, because crucifixion is apparently what happens to him regardless of the circumstances. And it is making a separate joke about cancel culture. The idea that a comedian can be destroyed by an audience that takes offense at a joke. That the modern campus environment has become a kind of crucifixion machine for anyone who says the wrong thing. The show is pointing at both targets simultaneously and leaving it up to the viewer to decide which one is the main joke. Brian and Stewie return to the present. Christianity no longer exists. The world has changed. The Griffins are all Jewish now. Judaism, in the alternate timeline where Christianity never happened, became the dominant religion of the Western world. Quahog has changed. The family wears yarmulkes. The neighbor Cleveland has become Sammy Davis Brown Jr., which is a reference to Sammy Davis Jr., the entertainer who famously converted to Judaism. The Griffin's daughter Meg mentions she is going shopping at a store called Ross Dress for the same price as everywhere else, which is a joke about Jewish people and value shopping. The movie theater is showing a film starring Adam Sandler, Ben Stiller, and half of Scarlett Johansson, a reference to Johansson's Jewish heritage. Brian looks around at this world and says he has zero problem with it. He is comfortable. He is happy. Judaism as the dominant religion is fine with him. Then sundown arrives. Shabbat begins. The family shuts off the television. They put away their phones and their electronics. They prepare to walk to the synagogue. They will not be using any technology from Friday sundown to Saturday night. Brian looks at this and immediately decides that Judaism is also a problem. Stewie, seeing Brian's reaction, takes matters into his own hands. He travels back to the time of Moses, finds Moses on his way to receive the 10 Commandments, and pays him $20 to walk away and not receive them. He notes, helpfully, that $20 was a lot of money back then, and that anyone would have done it for $20. Moses takes the money. He walks away. The 10 Commandments are never delivered. With neither Christianity nor Judaism having ever existed, Islam, which grew directly out of both traditions, also ceases to exist as a side effect. The world is now completely without the Abrahamic religions. Brian and Stewie return to the present. The world is religion-free. Brian looks around and delivers his verdict. Finally, a world with no religion, no prejudices, no irrationalities, just science-based reason. Then God shows up. God, in the religion-free world, is a UPS delivery driver. He has the uniform, he has the truck, he has the clipboard. He is not happy. He has been tracking Stewie down using the new chip that was installed at the veterinary clinic at the very beginning of the episode. The same chip that started the whole chain of events. The same chip that led Brian to Emma. The same chip that led to the Christian rock concert and the rejection and the time machine. The chip that began the story is the chip that ends it. God grabs Stewie and Brian and gives them noogies. He keeps going until they agree to restore the original timeline. Stewie agrees. Brian refuses. Brian attempts to make the case for the religion-free world, to argue that this is better, that this is what they should have. God's response to this argument is to hit Brian harder. Stewie, mid-noogie, delivers the episode's most honest line. He asks whether this is all religion is, threatening people with noogies if they dare to think for themselves. God does not answer this question. He just keeps going until they comply. Eventually they do. The timeline is restored. The episode ends with the Griffin family at Holy Christ Church singing hymns, with Brian and Stewie sitting in the pews, visibly injured from the noogie session. The episode aired on April 17, 2024, as the 15th episode of Season 22. It received a 5.8 out of 10 on IMDb, which is considerably lower than the show's average for its stronger seasons, and significantly lower than Road to the Multiverse, which covered similar territory 15 years earlier and received a 9.1. The reviews split clearly. Viewers who found it funny described it as similar to classic Family Guy, entertaining and unpredictable, and noted that Brian's frustration with being an atheist in a religious society was relatable. Viewers who found it offensive described it as incredibly disrespectful, said it contained genuine blasphemy, and in some cases noted that they were not Christian or Jewish themselves, but still found the episode deeply troubling. Several reviews noted something that the episode's placement in Season 22 makes impossible to miss. This is the same argument the show made in Season 8 with Road to the Multiverse. The same two characters, the same time machine, the same Christianity never existed premise, the same conclusion that a world without religion would be better. 15 years of additional television, and the show is back in the same place, making the same point, using the same tools. The difference, and it is a meaningful one, is the framing. In Road to the Multiverse, the no Christianity universe is presented as genuinely superior. Flying cars, cured diseases, stunning technology. The argument is made with confidence and spectacle, and the kind of visual comedy that earns its laugh before it lands its point. In Faith No More, the same argument is made by a dog who got rejected for sex and is using a time machine to take his frustration out on world history. The argument is identical. The person making it is embarrassing. This shift, from confident statement to self-undermining joke, is the most honest thing about Faith No More as an episode. It suggests that somewhere in the 22 seasons between these two episodes, the show, or its writers, or both, developed some awareness that the argument they have been making is more personal than universal, more reactive than philosophical, more about Seth MacFarlane's specific feelings about the specific religion he grew up in than about any serious engagement with the question of whether religion, broadly, is good or bad for humanity. Brian erasing Christianity because a woman will not sleep with him is not a character endorsing atheism. It is a character exposing the gap between the high-minded language people use to justify their irreligion and the much pettier feelings that often sit underneath it. The show is, for perhaps the first time in its long history of religion jokes, laughing at its own argument rather than just at its target. Whether it intended to do this, or whether it happened by accident, is something only the writers could say. But it is there in the episode, visible to anyone who has watched the full 25-year arc. Which brings us, finally, to the question of what all of this amounts to. 25 years, hundreds of religion jokes, multiple banned episodes, a lawsuit, a 9-year streaming absence, a dog who got rejected, a delivery driver with a noogie habit, a man who grew up Catholic and never quite got over it. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What did Family Guy actually do to how a generation thinks about religion? And was it the equal opportunity slaughter it claimed to be, or something more specific, more personal, and more complicated than that? Section 12. What 25 years of God-bashing actually made? Family Guy's legacy as America's atheist catechism. The show has been on the air since January 31st, 1999. It premiered after the Super Bowl, which is one of the most watched television events in American broadcasting, meaning that the very first time most people saw Family Guy, they were watching it in a room full of people who had gathered to watch football. The show landed in front of the largest possible audience on its first night and immediately started making jokes about religion, family, and everything else it has been making jokes about for the 25 years since. That is a long time. Long enough for the children who watch the early seasons to grow up, have children of their own, and potentially introduce those children to the show. Long enough for the culture around the show to shift multiple times while the show itself kept going. Long enough for a creator's personal grievances with the religion he grew up in to become, through sheer accumulated broadcast hours, something that functions more like an institution than a complaint. 22 seasons. The show has been canceled twice and returned both times. It survived the cancellation of 2002, when Fox removed it from the schedule, and came back in 2005 because the DVD sales and the Adult Swim reruns demonstrated that the audience was still there, still watching, still wanting more. That return from cancellation is one of the more remarkable stories in American television history. An animated show that was canceled, built its entire fan base back through home video and cable reruns, and returned stronger than it had been before. The religion jokes were part of what made those DVDs sell. People were buying the show specifically to watch the content that the network had been nervous about, including the When You Wish Upon a Weinstein episode that Fox had refused to broadcast. The show's target audience has always been the 18 to 34 demographic. That demographic, young adults, people in college or recently out of it, people forming their opinions about the world and their place in it, was the group that made Family Guy what it became. The generation that grew up with the golden era of Family Guy, which most fans and critics place somewhere between seasons 1 through 8, graduated high school and college during a period when polling organizations were beginning to track something significant happening in American religious life. The number of Americans who identified as having no religious affiliation, people who describe themselves as atheist, agnostic, or simply nothing in particular, has grown substantially across the period that Family Guy has been on the air. In the late 1990s, when the show first began, this group represented a relatively small portion of the American population. By the mid-2020s, it has become one of the largest and fastest-growing categories in surveys about American religious identity. Young adults, specifically, have been leaving organized religion at rates that researchers have described as historically unusual. Family Guy did not cause this. That would be too simple and too large a claim to make fairly. Television shows do not single-handedly reshape how societies relate to their deepest beliefs. But Family Guy existed inside this shift, aimed squarely at the demographic that was doing most of the shifting, and spent 25 years making the same basic argument: that religious belief is a human invention, that the institutions built around that belief cause real harm to real people, and that a person who rejects religion is not a monster, but a critical thinker, to tens of millions of people during the years when those people were forming their views. The Pop Matters academic analysis of the show notes that Family Guy's approach to religion is more openly disapproving than The Simpsons, which is the other long-running animated show that has dealt with faith as a regular subject. The Simpsons has Homer, who is lazy about church but not hostile to the idea of God. It has Ned Flanders, who is religious in a way the show treats as sincere even while it makes him a joke. The Simpsons holds religion at arm's length. It pokes fun at religious practice without making the case that religious belief itself is wrong. Family Guy does not hold religion at arm's length. Family Guy has a position, and the position is Seth MacFarlane's position, and MacFarlane has been explicit about what that position is in more than 20 years of public interviews. Brian Griffin, as the show's atheist character, became over time one of the more culturally significant atheist figures in American popular culture. Not because he is a particularly good representative of atheism, as the Not All Dogs Go to Heaven episode demonstrated clearly, but because he is a familiar one. He is in millions of living rooms every week. He is not a philosopher or an academic or a figure that requires any effort to access. He is a cartoon dog who drinks martinis and does not believe in God, and he has been making that combination of traits seem normal and relatable to a mass audience for 2.5 decades. The show's legacy in terms of what it actually did to its audience is not easy to measure precisely, but the cultural artifacts it left behind give some sense of the shape of it. The worse than Hitler image from Not All Dogs Go to Heaven became a widely circulated internet meme, which means that the show's portrait of how religious communities treat atheists, however clumsy and heavy-handed the episode was in delivering it, became a shorthand image that millions of people used to describe situations where someone was being punished for a non-conforming belief. The meme spread the argument of the episode to people who never watched the episode. The Road to the Multiverse Universe Without Christianity sequence became one of the most referenced pieces of the show's entire catalog in discussions about religion and science. The specific claim, Christianity caused the Dark Ages, no Christianity means a 1,000-year head start, gets repeated in online arguments about religion with enough frequency that it has become a kind of cultural shorthand, a quick argument that a certain kind of person deploys to make a certain kind of point. The fact that the argument is historically contested, as this video noted in that section, has not stopped it from spreading. The cartoon version of the argument is easier to remember and easier to repeat than the complicated historical reality. The When You Wish Upon a Weinstein episode, once it finally aired and the lawsuit was resolved and the controversy settled, became a case study in how American network television handles religious content. Specifically, who gets to make jokes about which groups, who has standing to make those jokes, and what the legal and commercial risks of those jokes are. The 4-year standoff between Fox and a completed episode, the rabbi consultations, the lawsuit over a parody lyric, the Jewish writer, the Jewish cast members, all of it combined to produce one of the more thoroughly documented examples of what actually happens behind the scenes when a major television network tries to figure out where the line is. The Turban Cowboy episode and its 9-year streaming absence produced a different kind of legacy. It became the example that people point to when they argue that Family Guy's equal opportunity offense is not actually equal, that the show will go far and deep with Christianity because MacFarlane knows it personally and is protected from backlash by his atheism. but will produce one shallow episode about Islam and then have that episode disappear from the internet following a real-world tragedy that the episode had nothing to do with, but was uncomfortably adjacent to. The Parents Television Council's campaign against the show, which ran across many years and many public statements and many letters to Fox and the FCC, produced its own kind of legacy. The organization condemned the show's religious content as anti-Christian bigotry, called specific episodes indecent, and lobbied for regulatory action. None of their campaigns resulted in any significant change to what the show broadcast. The show kept going, the PTC kept condemning it, the show got bigger. McFarlane, asked about the PTC in an interview, called them literally terrible human beings and said they spend their entire day hating people. He added that for an organization that prides itself on Christian values, and here he noted his own atheism as if granting himself permission to observe this, they are rotten to the core. This exchange, more than almost any other in the show's history, captures the dynamic that has defined Family Guy's relationship with organized religion for 25 years. The show makes the jokes, the institutions push back. The show says the institutions prove the point. The institutions keep pushing back. The show keeps going. What the show built across this whole arc is something that functions as a kind of informal catechism for a certain kind of American secular worldview. Not a rigorous one, not a philosophically careful one, not one that would satisfy anyone who wanted to engage seriously with the actual arguments for or against religious belief, but an emotional one, a set of images and jokes and recurring characters and familiar scenes that encode a particular attitude toward religion and make that attitude feel normal, relatable, and shared. Francis Griffin encodes the idea that religious certainty produces cruelty toward the people closest to you. Brian's atheism encodes the idea that rejecting religion is what thoughtful people do, even if the show occasionally undercuts this by making Brian bad at defending his own position. The Road to the Multiverse universe encodes the idea that religion held science back and that a world without it would be better. The God character encodes the idea that even if a God exists, that existence does not justify the weight human institutions have placed on it. The Turban Cowboy episode, for all its failures, encodes the idea that the show has at least gestured toward every major tradition, even if it did not engage with all of them equally. Seth MacFarlane grew up Catholic in Connecticut, drew a Communion Fries cartoon at the age of 11, went to the Rhode Island School of Design, got a television show, and spent 25 years broadcasting the argument he started making in that local newspaper to the largest possible audience he could find. He executive produced Cosmos. He donated Carl Sagan's papers to the Library of Congress. He appeared on Bill Maher's show and said about the growth of public atheism that it was about time. He built Brian Griffin in his own image and gave Brian the arguments he wished he had made better, and then, in the show's later seasons, made Brian embarrass himself with those arguments just enough to suggest that the position might be more complicated than the early seasons presented it. The Danny Smith episodes. Holy crap, the Weinstein episode. Not All Dogs, The Fonz Church, represent the show's most honest and most personal engagement with what religion actually does, inside families, inside communities, inside the specific experience of someone who grew up in the church and left it. These are the episodes where the comedy is deepest because the wound is deepest. Francis Griffin is a better portrait of religious extremism than almost anything the show has done since, precisely because he was drawn from something real. What the show leaves behind, after 25 years, is not a coherent argument about religion. It is something messier and more human than that. The accumulated record of a group of people working through, in the most public way possible, their complicated feelings about the institution they came from. Some of those episodes are brilliant. Some are mistakes MacFarlane later apologized for. Some are lazy. Some are profound. All of them together tell you something true about what it feels like to grow up inside a faith tradition, reject it, and then spend the rest of your life unable to stop talking about it. The boy who drew the Communion Fries cartoon never really stopped drawing it. He just got better tools, a bigger audience, and a cartoon dog to say the things that are harder to say with your own face attached. And that is the story of Family Guy and religion. Not a clean argument, not a fair fight, not an equal opportunity assault on every tradition that has ever asked people to believe in something beyond themselves. Something more specific than that, something more personal. Something that looks, when you stand back far enough to see all 25 years of it at once, less like a television show making jokes, and more like a man who has never quite finished the conversation he started at the altar when he was 11 years old. The jokes were always the conversation. The conversation was always the point. And after 25 years and 22 seasons and one lawsuit and one 9-year streaming absence and one episode MacFarlane said he regretted and one dog who erased Christianity because a woman would not sleep with him, the conversation is still going. Which means the show is still doing exactly what it set out to do on January 31st, 1999, in the biggest possible room to the largest possible audience. It is still asking whether you want fries with that. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.